Welcome to an Alt-Shift X live stream. Today we're talking about House of the Dragon, Episode 3, and I gotta say, crabs in the chat for our boy, Kragas Crabfeeder, dead in one episode. If you were expecting Kragas Crabfeeder, the freaky guy with the mask, if you were expecting him to be a ongoing villain throughout the season, sorry to disappoint you, but Daemon has slew the Crabfeeder. And I love Daemon's reasons for it. Like, the thing that spurred Daemon to go on this, like, near suicide mission of, like, single-handedly going and fighting the Triarchy men himself to go after the Crabfeeder. The thing that spurred Daemon to go and kill the crab is that his brother Viserys sent a message saying, hey, I'm going to send you aid. And Daemon was so angry that Viserys was sending his army to help Daemon that Daemon, like, beat a messenger with his own helmet. He was furious that his brother was helping him. And I think the reason for that is that Daemon wants to do it himself. Like an impetuous younger brother, he refuses help because he wants to prove his independent strength and he wants to, win glory to his name personally. If he lets his big brother come and handle the problem for him, his pride would be wounded. And Daemon did this not only in like a suicidally risky way, but he did it in a dishonorable way. Daemon came to the Crabfeeder with a white flag. He came under a peace banner, and yet he betrayed the men who came to accept his surrender and attacked them instead, which is what is called a dick move. If you don't follow those conventions of war, if you don't respect a peace banner, wars can become more violent than they otherwise would. So it's a pretty horrible thing to do. And I enjoyed that they didn't show like an epic duel between Daemon and the Crabfeeder. We just saw Daemon carrying the Crabfeeder's carcass after he was done with him, which I liked because we didn't need to see the fight, because we know Daemon would win. Daemon has a Valyrian steel sword, Dark Sister. The Crabfeeder is a disease-riddled person who does not look like he could put up much of a fight. I enjoy Crabfeeder as, like, he seems more of like a leader who sort of skulks in the shadows, and maybe he's like the mastermind, and, he creates fear by nailing people to the beach, but maybe Crabfeeder himself is not much of a fighter. Yeah, I can respect that. Thanks for the super chat from Kate, who says, can the Valerion children ride dragons? So, yeah, we had a dramatic saved by the dragon moment. Daemon was saved by none other than Laenor Velaryon on the dragon Seasmoke. So, you may not recall who Laenor Velaryon is. So, here's the family tree. So, Corlys Velaryon's family, Lord Corlys, he has his wife Rhaenys, and he has his two children, Laena and Laenor. We did see Laenor in previous episodes as a younger child. This is young Laenor. I'm so sorry that this is the only picture we have of Laenor, but this is the official picture that HBO is using. I'm so sorry to that actor, because he has such a goofy face in this photo. But that's young Laenor, and we saw him at the tournament with his sister Laena. And this episode is, this new episode is a few years later, so this is Laenor grown up, the son of the sea snake. It looks like he's grown an awful lot, because it's only been about 3 or 4 years since the previous episode. Alicent has given birth to a son, the son of King Viserys and Alicent Hightower is this little baby Aegon, which creates a rivalry with Viserys' daughter, Rhaenyra. But yeah, we're a few years later, and Laenor is a dragon rider, because he is the son of Rhaenys Targaryen. And to answer your question, Kate, yeah, like these Velaryon children of Rhaenys Targaryen, Laenor, at least, can ride dragons, because he's got that Targaryen blood. So it's not just the name Targaryen that gives you the ability to ride dragons, it's having that blood of the dragon. It seems some sort of genetic, like a magical property of the Targaryen bloodline. And that's part of why the Targaryens mostly marry their own sisters. Aegon the Conqueror married his sisters, Balon married his sister. King Jaehaerys married his sister because they want that dragon riding genetics to stay in the family, in the royal bloodline. And if it was that Rhaenys became queen, and then, Laena or Laenor inherited the throne after Rhaenys, then the dragon riders still would be the royal line. But Laenor is a dragon rider who is not a king because Viserys became king instead. So it is a weird situation where there are dragon riders who are not Targaryens and are not in line for the throne. Dragons are certainly like a symbol of royalty. But yeah, Laenor's a dragon rider. His dragon is called Sea Smoke, and he saved Daemon from the Triarchy. Thanks for the super chat from Zoe, who says, if Rhaenyra and Cole are the only ones to see the White Hart, will anyone else recognize it as an omen? Yeah, so we had King Viserys going on a hunt, a big, fun festival where everyone got together and went hunting with the king in celebration of his son, the little baby, King Aegon, his second name day, I think it was. So we see that Alicent and Viserys have had a baby. And there's this big festival, and I love how Viserys is saying, I came here to hunt, I'm here to just have fun. But while he's like scooping onions onto his plate, everyone's saying, oh, we've got to deal with this war, we've got to deal with the succession. But like Viserys is like, I just want to eat my onions. I really liked Viserys's stress and frustration with the politics and with his family. But yeah, like they were going out to hunt a white hart. And a white hart is a white deer. And it is historically a symbol of royalty, as Ryan Condal explained in the Inside the episode. It's associated with kingship. And I get the sense that it's like, if you see or if you capture the white hart, it's like a symbol that you are legitimate. You are like chosen by God to be the king. Because in real history, the white hart was a symbol of royalty. And so it's really interesting that, King Viserys and everybody went out on this hunt to kill the White Hart as a sort of a good omen, which would be associated with Aegon, his baby son Aegon Targaryen. But in the end, Viserys only found a normal stag, a normal brown deer. It was Rhaenyra who finds the White Hart. And the way the White Hart appears to Rhaenyra, it's so majestic and it's peaceful. And, she doesn't try to kill it. She respects it. And that sort of fits with something that is said in the books about a White Hart. So in the first Game of Thrones book, a similar thing happens where a White Hart is sighted in the Kingswood, we are told. And then Sansa says that she has like a special dream about the White Hart. This is in the first Game of Thrones book. Sansa says, I had a dream that Joffrey would be the one to take the White Hart. It had been more of a wish, actually, but it sounded better to call it a dream. Everyone knew that dreams were prophetic. White Harts were supposed to be very rare and magical, and in her heart she knew her gallant prince was worthier than his drunken father, Robert. But when they do find the White Hart in the Game of Thrones book, the White Hart has already been killed by wolves. So that itself is sort of a bad omen about Joffrey and about Robert at the time. So my point is that the fact that Rhaenyra sees the White Hart, you could see that as a sign that Rhaenyra is the true legitimate heir, chosen by God or whatever. So this might inspire Rhaenyra to think, yeah, I am the true heir, not Aegon, the baby Aegon, who was only represented by this normal deer. And I loved the scene where Viserys killed the deer because it's so dark and ominous and horrible. Like, we just feel awful for this deer. And everybody applauds after Viserys kills it, but it just feels so, like, false and bad and ominous, which is a bad omen for, Aegon, the baby. Yeah, really dark. Thanks for the super chat from Shwami, who says, no spoilers here. Thanks for the super chat from Sean, who says, George Martin finally got his realistic royal boar hunt party. Must be HBO's way of apologizing for his least favorite got scene. Yeah, so in Game of Thrones Season 1, the original TV show, we did have a quote-unquote hunting scene where Robert went out on a hunt. But that scene was considerably less fancy than this big hunt we had. Like, the original Game of Thrones show did not have the budget for the kind of, like, giant festival that we saw in House of the Dragon. So in Game of Thrones Season 1, it was literally just Robert Baratheon, his brother Renly, and Barristan Selmy, and Lancel Lannister just walking in single file through the forest with a spear. No dogs, no horses, no nothing. And that was the entirety of the hunting thing, which, they didn't have a budget in Game of Thrones Season 1. So yeah, it is funny to see a proper big royal hunt in House of the Dragon, which is what it should have been all along. And we did actually get to see a boar in this episode when a wild boar attacked Rhaenyra and Criston Cole while they were out having a cute camping trip, and Rhaenyra finished off the boar after Criston wounded it. I thought it was slightly silly the way that the boar like sort of knocked over Rhaenyra and stood over Rhaenyra, and the boar sort of like shook its head at Rhaenyra for a few seconds, and I was like, how is Rhaenyra not dead? Why is this boar not? I don't know. But, as an emotional expression, Rhaenyra stabbed the shit out of this boar, which shows her pent-up frustration and anger over her situation, because she hates that, she doesn't feel like she has a place in the world now, because all the attention is on the new baby son, Aegon, and her new stepmother, Alicent, and we see how awkward Rhaenyra's relationship is with Alicent now. And so she feels really frustrated and displaced and replaced, and so she lets it out on the boar. Thanks for the super chat from Jordan, Crabs in the chat. Thanks for the super chat from Marcella Deliveria, who says, is the concept of my friend Rowan himself a horse? Yes, everyone is a horse. Everyone who is on a horse is a horse. Lucy says, no crab fight, super disappointing. I can understand if people find it underwhelming, like the death of the crab feeder, because he did seem like such a massive villain, but we didn't even see him like say anything in this entire show, did we? He got no dialogue. I did find it kind of funny in the opening scenes when we had this Valerion knight who was like being nailed to the beach by the crab feeder. And I feel like the Valerion knight, it was nice of him to drop so much exposition while he was being like crucified. He said, "Oh, House Valerion is coming for you. The sea snake, Corlys, and Daemon. Fuck you, Prince Drahar." Like he uses the title Prince Drahar while he's being nailed. It was very helpful of this guy to name all of the important characters to remind us of the players in this story. Thanks for the super chat from Johnny Wolf. Thanks for the super chat from Soda Water, who brings up Viserys, who was, not having a good time. And I think that the reason why Viserys is not having a good time in this episode is because he genuinely cares. I feel like that's Viserys' problem. Like, if Viserys just said, nope, I'm going to marry Rhaenyra off, and I'm choosing my heir to be Rhaenyra or whatever, and, I mean, my point is, like, he needs to make a decision and stick to it. But Viserys is doubting himself constantly because he has so much sympathy and care for Rhaenyra and for Alicent. Like, Viserys wants everyone to be happy. Like, he says this episode that, no matter what I do, I'm pissing someone off. If Viserys didn't care so much about everybody's feelings all the time, I think he would have an easier time of sticking to his decisions. But Viserys doesn't just want his house to be strong. He wants his house to be strong, and he wants his daughter Rhaenyra to be happy, and he wants Daemon to be happy, and he wants Corlys to be happy, and he wants Otto to be happy, and you can't please everyone at once. And I think that is Viserys' problem. And, we see Viserys drinking a lot this episode, which is not a great coping mechanism, and it is reminiscent again of Robert Baratheon. Robert Baratheon's drinking while he was on a royal hunt is what got him killed in Game of Thrones Season 1. Robert was killed by a boar. So, it does feel kind of ominous to see Viserys echoing Robert in this way. I liked how in Game of Thrones Season 6 we did get a little scene of we got to see this play where Robert was on his hunt, and then the boar killed Robert in Season 6 Episode 5. So we've seen many iterations of royal hunts and boars and things. Thanks for the super chat from Night King, who says, "Why was Daemon touching Crab Feeder? He's going to get grayscale." Yes. Yeah, I thought, like the last shot of the episode, Daemon was covered in the crab feeder's blood, which seems like a terrible idea given that the crab feeder has grayscale, which is like a highly communicable disease. The grayscale thing is not in the books. The books don't mention crab feeder having grayscale. I think they just added that to the show to, give the crab feeder something interesting visually. And I do like the idea we talked in our video last week that the idea that grayscale might make a person more dangerous and more crazy because they've got nothing to lose, and the grayscale disease can affect people's brain. But the thing about grayscale is that it comes in several different forms. So there is the grayscale version that will, turn you into a zombie man and make you a monster. But there's also the form of grayscale that doesn't kill you. It just disfigures you and then stops. And so an example of that is Shireen Baratheon. So Shireen Baratheon in Game of Thrones had a case of grayscale when she was very young. But the form of grayscale that she had was one which eventually goes dormant and it stops killing you at a certain point. So Shireen is no longer contagious at this point. So I guess you could speculate that maybe the crab feeder also has that form of grayscale, which is no longer contagious. But the interesting thing about Shireen in the books is that, everyone, no one's worried about her grayscale anymore, except for the character Val. And Val is a book-only character. Where is she? Here's some artwork of Val by Drazenka Kimple. Val is a wildling princess, is what she's called. She is the sister of Dalla, who is the wife of Mance Rayder, who's the wildling king. And Val is this sort of badass wildling chick who has a potential romance with Jon Snow going on in the books. Maybe she'll appear in the Jon Snow sequel show, if that happens. But Val says about Shireen, she says Shireen is not clean. The girl has death inside her. The grey plague sleeps only to wake again. So Val says that grayscale, even if you think that the grayscale is no longer contagious, it actually can still come back and kill you or something, is what she seems to be saying. This is sort of a tangent, but my point is that if I was Daemon, I would not be bathing in the blood of the diseased crab feeder. Thanks for the super chat from Neon Taster, who says Viserys wasn't missing one finger, he was missing two. Yeah, so I'm not sure which shot. Maybe maybe here. I think that Viserys was missing some fingers. So it looks as though Viserys's situation with his finger where he got a cut has gotten worse and worse and worse. And you really get the sense that Viserys is falling apart, his body is infected and rotting. And also just psychologically, we see him drinking a whole lot. He's in a real sorry state in this scene at the bonfire with Alicent. He's just doubting himself. He's really suffering under the weight of his responsibilities. And of course, yeah, it's a very bad omen that his fingers are falling off because of the cut from the throne. Thanks for the donation from Ranark, who says Daemon definitely should have gotten grayscale. Look, maybe it was the dormant form. Maybe it's fine. Thanks for the super chat from Amir and Beef Swelling, who says, Beef Swelling says, I do not understand how Viserys ever rode Balerion. He seems pretty meek and laid back to have ridden the biggest dragon ever. Yeah, so it is really, really interesting. Here's some artwork by Jordi Gonzalez Escamilla of Balerion the Black Dread. So Balerion was the biggest, baddest, toughest dragon in the world. And Balerion was the dragon of Aegon the Conqueror, who was the guy who created the Iron Throne all those years ago. Balerion was so large that when Balerion flew over a town, it would overshadow the entire town. It would cast a whole place into shadow. And Balerion was so fearsome and dangerous. Visenya's dragon Vagon is still around, but Balerion was the biggest and baddest, and Viserys rode Balerion. the biggest weapon of war the world has ever seen. But then Balerion died of old age, like shortly after Viserys rode Balerion, and Viserys never rode another dragon, because it seems as though once you ride one dragon, you can never ride another dragon. You bond with that dragon for life. Whereas a dragon, because dragons live much longer than humans, dragons can bond with multiple riders. Like Caraxes, Daemon's dragon, was originally ridden by Daemon's uncle Aemon. So it is really interesting that Viserys rode this badass dragon, but then he said, oh, we should never ride dragons. They're too dangerous. We can't control them. And maybe that makes me think that maybe when Viserys was younger, he was more gung-ho, he was more aggressive, he was more risk-taking, but maybe he had an experience with Balerion that changed his mind, that scared him, maybe, you know? Like, maybe Viserys struggled to control Balerion. Maybe Balerion did something scary and dangerous and violent, and Viserys was horrified by that. Maybe we'll get some sort of reveal like that in the show. I think that'd be really cool. Because, yeah, it's a really interesting contradiction in Viserys' character. And we see how, you know, sometimes Targaryens are scared by their dragons. Sometimes the Targaryens fail to control their dragons. Like Daenerys sometimes fails to control Drogon, and Daenerys is horrified when Drogon eats children. And so she locks up her dragons in Book 5 and Season 5 because she's afraid of what her dragons can do. So, yeah, this is not without precedent. Thanks for the super chat from Smalzish, who says, 3 episodes in and we zooming through time. Already 5 years from the start of the first episode. I think it was like 6 months between 1 and 2, and it's like 3 years between 2 and 3. So it's been a few years, yeah. And I do feel like the appearance of the characters does not necessarily make sense. Like, Laenor went from a little baby to a grown-ass man in those 4 years, whereas Rhaenyra and Alicent haven't changed at all. But, you know, that's just the realities of casting, I guess. Thanks for the donation from Zephelios, who says, loved the symbolism of Viserys missing fingers to show how the rot has progressed. Yeah, and the rot has progressed due to his refusal to remove the fingers. I think that's a really good point, Zephelios. Like, if Viserys was more decisive, and if Viserys just, like, did the decisive, conclusive thing and cut off the rotten fingers, then maybe the rot would stop. But because Viserys refuses to make a clear decision, the rot continues. And I think that's, like, an analogy for Viserys' decisions with his succession. Like, Viserys thinks of Rhaenyra as his heir still, but as we saw, like, you know, Tywin Lannister and a lot of people, or Jason Lannister, bloody twins, can't tell them apart. A lot of people think of the new baby Aegon as the heir to the throne, despite Viserys' wishes. And since he doesn't force Rhaenyra to marry off, he doesn't say, hey everyone, Aegon is not the heir, you know, like he sort of vacillates. He tries to have it both ways. But if he did something more decisive, cut off the finger, maybe the rot would stop. Zephelios also says that Laenor looked as though he was going to say something about pod racing after the cheer on Dragonback. I literally thought the same thing. When Laenor swooped in on his dragon and he said, like, woo, or something while he was flying the dragon. Yeah, I absolutely got some pod racing vibes. But I'm glad that we got to see Laenor on Sea Smoke, because Laenor and Sea Smoke is not mentioned taking a part in this war in the books. But it totally makes sense that he would be here. Since the Velaryons are taking part, since Corlys is taking part. Of course, Laenor's son on Dragonback would be involved. In the books, they talk about how, like, the soldiers that they mention, they mostly talk about how Daemon gathered a bunch of, like, adventurers and mercenaries and second sons, and it sounds as though it's mostly Daemon's people who form the army in the books. But I like how here, you know, this is a Velaryon military operation that Daemon is taking part in, mostly because he's got a bloody dragon, and the dragons are so important militarily. Thanks for the super chat from Jacob, who says Kragos got war crimed. Yeah, it is so wrong that Daemon used a peace banner only to betray them. Lord Strong is a beast. Caraxes stays winning. Is Viserys alcoholic maxing? Yeah, you just, like, see the look on Viserys' face when he gets more and more stressed and he just drinks more and more, and it is not great. And yeah, we did see Lionel Strong, Lord of Harrenhal, pushing the Velaryons as potential spouses for the Targaryens. Lionel Strong was saying that Rhaenyra should marry Laenor Velaryon, which is probably a smart idea, right? Because the Velaryons are really angry that Viserys didn't marry a Velaryon and Rhaenys was kept off the throne at the Harrenhal Council. Rhaenyra marrying Laenor, you'd think, could solve a lot of problems. And, it would bring the Velaryon dragon rider Laenor back into the Targaryen fold, because it does seem very dangerous to have another family having dragon riders and having the blood of the dragon. Thanks for the super chat from Dwan, who says, I love the idea that Otto needed a bit of a push from his brother to push the issue of succession. I think he genuinely cares for the realm. Yeah, it was interesting to have this conversation between Otto Hightower, the Hand of the King, and Hobart Hightower, the Lord of Old Town. And we saw Hobart sort of ordering Otto around and saying, hey, you need to get your grandson, baby Aegon, to be the heir to the throne. And, he seems like a sort of an arrogant guy who was sort of pushing Otto around, which is really interesting because, like, Otto has always sort of seemed like the one in charge when we've seen him. But now we see that Otto seems to be operating on Hobart's wishes a bit. We saw Otto writing a letter to Old Town in Season 1, Episode 1. So maybe he was writing to Otto to tell him, hey, by the way, I've sent my daughter to go and have sex with the king. Well, one of the things that we didn't talk about was the idea that in the previous episode, we saw Otto tell Alicent, hey, you should go and visit the king tonight. And some people, I've seen people online say that, hey, look, Alicent was wearing the same dress the following morning. Like, she went and visited King Viserys, and then the next morning, yeah, here we are. So at the end of the previous episode, Alicent was wearing this blue dress, which is the same dress that Alicent was wearing when Otto told her at nighttime, you should go and visit the king. And some people have seen this as evidence that Alicent slept with Viserys and had sex, wearing the same clothes the next morning. Walk of shame. And therefore, maybe part of the reason why Viserys said he would marry Alicent was because he was worried that, since he took Alicent's virginity and potentially even got her pregnant, it would be a huge dishonor to Alicent unless he married her. Like, if she was deflowered and had a child out of wedlock, that would be a huge problem politically. So there's the idea that maybe because they had sex, that's why Viserys married her. And we don't, this is just speculation. We don't know if they actually had sex, but it is with precedent because, like, Robb Stark in Game of Thrones and in the books hooked up with this woman Talisa, and in the books he hooked up with this girl Jane Westerling, and part of the reason why he married Jane Westerling was because he had sex with her in, like, a fit of passion and teenage horniness, and in order to not dishonor her, that's why he married her, to protect her honor. It was the honorable thing to do. So maybe something similar happened with Viserys. Thanks for the super chat from Milan, who says, real dragons have 2 legs, yet the sigil has 4. I've seen many explanations for this, but curious on your thoughts. I don't really have an answer here. So, the Targaryen sigil is represented a lot of different ways. In the TV show, it's represented... let me find a good... Targaryen... In the TV show, the Targaryen sigil looks like this. Usually. So it's a 3-headed dragon with 2 legs. But in House of the Dragon, for some reason... Oh, that one's also got 2 legs. But some of the time, it's got 4 legs. Which is weird, because none of the actual dragons we've seen have 4 legs. But I think that Ryan Condal, the showrunner, was pointing out that in Season 6, Episode 10, and in some other spots, Daenerys used a 4-legged dragon, and so he's trying to, like, connect that symbolism to make it seem connected. I don't know if it's actually important either way. Maybe it was a production fuck up that they're just trying to paper over. I don't know. We'll see what happens, but I don't know if the sigil is super important. Thanks for the super chat from First Name, who says, why do they keep lying to us by saying that no woman has sat the throne when both Visenya and Rhaenys sat the throne and competently held court whenever Aegon was away? That would be a useful precedent for Rhaenyra. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I mean, the people keep saying, "Oh, there's never been a woman on the throne. There's never been a queen." But yeah, Aegon and Visenya, sorry, Rhaenys and Visenya, the wives of Aegon the Conqueror, they had a big influence politically, and they did hold court while Aegon was away sometimes. Here's the artwork by Amok. And so they certainly are a precedent of women holding power. And also, like, Jaehaerys's wife, Alysanne, was really influential politically. I think, like, even more than them, there's Alyssa Velaryon. This artwork's by Chili Raven Art. So in the books, Alyssa Velaryon was the wife of Aenys and the mother of King Jaehaerys. And while Jaehaerys was young, Alyssa was the regent of the realm. Like, she was in charge. Similar to how, like, Cersei is the regent for Tommen in Game of Thrones. So, like, Alyssa Velaryon and her husband, Rhaegar Baratheon, were running the show while Jaehaerys and Alysanne were young. So, yeah, I mean, there absolutely are examples of women sitting the throne literally and having political power. And yeah, you would think that Rhaenyra should bring this up. But I mean, Rhaenyra shouldn't need to bring it up because, you know, her father named her the heir, and all these lords, dozens of lords, bent the knee and swore loyalty to her. So none of this should even be relevant, you know? They said that she's the heir, and, you know, and they talk about, oh, you know, the precedent, there's never been a queen and whatever. But and, you know, the maesters say that, oh, you know, the Harrenhal Council, that means that no woman will ever sit the throne. But that's just one interpretation of the Harrenhal Council. I mean, you could argue that the Harrenhal Council, all the Harrenhal Council really meant was that Viserys was a preferable king to Rhaenys or Laenor, you know, because he's an adult male with a, you know, I don't know. There's different opinions on the precedents. Thanks for the super chat from Johnny, who says, how big is Caraxes supposed to be? Is he bigger or stronger than Drogon? I mean, I've seen, you know, stuff online, you know, size comparisons of all the dragons. You know, this is how much dragons weigh. George Martin does not tell us the you know, cubic weight and height and width of all these dragons. He doesn't describe that in a lot of detail. He just says what color they are, and he says that, you know, Vhagar is the biggest alive. You know, Syrax, Rhaenyra's dragon, is younger and smaller. Caraxes becomes pretty big. I mean, it's mostly about age is the size thing, and Caraxes has been around longer than Syrax and Seasmoke and stuff. So, yeah, Caraxes is one of the larger dragons, but it's not as big as Vhagar, but it is larger than Syrax. It's sort of in between. I enjoyed seeing Daemon just burning people. I really enjoyed when Daemon got hit by an arrow while he was on Caraxes, and Caraxes sort of squawked and cried out as though in pain. So it seems as though when Daemon feels pain, his dragon also feels pain because of that bond that they have. There's a lot of speculation that the connection between a Targaryen and their dragon is similar to the connection between a Stark and their direwolf. Like, you know how a lot of the Starks are wargs who can connect with their animals through some psychic power, and some of the wildlings are too. They can feel what their wolf feels. I think that it may be similar with the Targaryens. They have like a psychic bond with their dragons. I also liked seeing how Daemon used his dragon's wing as like a shield against arrows. It's just cool to see details like that about like how dragon combat and dragon flying works, because we haven't got a lot of those details in the books, but I think it all makes sense. Thanks for the super chat from Person, who says, do you think we are ever gonna get Mushroom? I don't want him to have a speaking role, just to be there, because he's a lad. Yeah, so in the book Fire and Blood, there is a character called Mushroom. This art is by Rossi Does Drawings. And Mushroom is a dwarf with a gigantic head and a gigantic penis. At least he claims to have a gigantic penis. And Mushroom is one of the historical sources that the book is based on. And while Eustace and Munkin are very serious and proper about what supposedly happened, Mushroom is constantly saying, those people boned, and those people boned, and they boned at the same time. So he has all these salacious rumors all the time. So he's just like a funny character, and he should be in the story because he was the jester for King Viserys and for several other characters. So you'd hope that he would appear. And in an interview of Ryan Condal by Westeros.org, there's a video on YouTube. They asked Ryan Condal about Mushroom, and Ryan Condal said yes, saying that Mushroom would appear at some point. So yeah, apparently we will see Mushroom in the show, which would be fun. And I agree, I don't want Mushroom to have a speaking role necessarily. Just as like a cameo for the book readers, I think would be cool. Thanks for the super chat from Camille, who says, I have the feeling that Alicent will become very soon a big politics player. I saw the next episode. I feel she will play a big part. Yes, I agree. So we had a conversation between Otto and Alicent where it seems as though Alicent is really starting to internalize Otto's lessons. Because Alicent says something here about how, you've got to make a call, is basically what Alicent was saying. Alicent is sort of urging Viserys to be more pragmatic, and we've got to wonder if Alicent might start pushing for the rights of her son, baby Aegon. Like Alicent in the previous episodes has been very sort of uncomfortable and not sure of herself, and she just sort of goes along with what's happening. Whereas I think now we're starting to see her become more assertive, because Alicent has skin in the game. Alicent has her baby, and the life of her baby, the place of her baby depends on its political place. And so, if Alicent can push for her baby to become King of Westeros, that would benefit her. That would benefit her family. And the other thing is that it's about safety as well, because even if Alicent just says, okay, Rhaenyra is heir, my baby is not the heir, that's all fine, we accept that, Rhaenyra is queen, whatever. Even if she does that, her baby's life is still potentially in danger, because there's a long history of potential claimants, potential rival claimants being roped into plots. It's just a little kid, right? What if, Corlys Velaryon or Otto Hightower or Hobart or someone just said, I want Aegon to be the king, and I'm going to start a war for Aegon to be the king. I'm going to marry or betroth Aegon to my daughter, and we're going to start a war to put them on the throne. So even if Aegon and Alicent don't want Aegon on the throne, Aegon could be used in a plot. Or Rhaenyra might see baby Aegon as a threat, and, when Viserys dies, and if Rhaenyra becomes queen, what if Rhaenyra says, well, we've got to kill little baby Aegon, we've got to throw him down a well, because he might be a threat to my legitimacy. As long as Aegon is alive, some lords are going to go, oh, I would prefer Aegon to be on the throne instead of Rhaenyra. So, just the existence of Aegon and the existence of Rhaenyra makes them a threat to each other. And that's why it is smart and it is a good idea. Someone suggests I think Otto suggests here to Viserys, maybe Rhaenyra should marry baby Aegon. Because that would settle the issue. Rhaenyra and Aegon will no longer be rival claimants if they marry. Unite the claims, end the conflict. That would piss off the Velaryons, probably. Because that would mean the Velaryons once again miss out on an opportunity to join the royal family. So you don't want to piss off the Velaryons again, but Rhaenyra marrying Aegon could solve a lot of problems. And it's so funny that Viserys' reaction when Otto says, hey, you should marry Rhaenyra to baby Aegon, Viserys is like, ew, that's so gross to marry Rhaenyra. They have such a large age gap, that's so gross. Which is fucking hilarious, given that Viserys just went on a date with, bloody Laena Velaryon, the little kid. And then he decided to marry Alicent, who is I think Alicent was meant to be 14 years old at the time. And Viserys is what? He's in his 40s, I guess. In the books, Viserys is only like 28 or something, or 38. I don't remember right now. But there's a very large age gap between Alicent and Viserys, so it's funny that Viserys is grossed out by the age gap between baby Aegon and Rhaenyra. And obviously, if they did marry Rhaegon and Rhaenyra and Aegon, it would probably just be a betrothal until the boy is old enough. And I guess that would be a complication because, you know, you would have to wait like 14 years before you can seal the deal and consummate the marriage. Because part of the idea with marriages is that until the newlyweds have sex, the marriage is not a done deal. Because before they have sex, you can undo a marriage. You can annul a marriage until they've had sex, then you can't annul it. So you'd have to wait a while before Aegon and Rhaenyra could consummate and cement the marriage. Thanks for the super chat from Dwan, who says, who's better at self-sabotage, Rhaenyra or Cersei? Is Rhaenyra self-sabotaging herself? I mean, like, if Rhaenyra wants the throne, she should marry someone. I mean, if Rhaenyra wants the throne, she should marry Laenor. Because Laenor has a dragon, which is like such a symbol of legitimacy, and the Velaryons have such close ties to the throne, and like, you know, Rhaenys and Corlys would be huge allies to like support Rhaenyra's claim. If Rhaenyra wants the throne, she should be seeking allies. She shouldn't just be complaining. But that's the thing, like, Rhaenyra is not acting like a politician. Rhaenyra is acting like a teenager, because Rhaenyra is a teenager. I really enjoyed the scene where Rhaenyra was sitting on the heart tree in the Godswood, and she was telling this minstrel, whose name was Samwell, play the song again about Nymeria. I think it was a song about Princess Nymeria and her 10,000 ships. And you know, she was basically treating this motherfucker like an iPod shuffle. Like, she was just saying, play the same song, play Despacito on repeat while I read my book. Which I thought was just very funny. It's just teenage behavior. Like, she is quite mean to people. She is quite mean to Samwell the minstrel. Samwell the human Zune. The human iPod Nano. Rhaenyra is kind of mean to people, but, you know, it's because she's a teenager. Like, Rhaenyra is meant to be, I think, about 17 years old. Was it 17 or 18? And, you know, she's just grumpy, and she's, you know, hormonal, as any teenager is, and she's sort of letting out her frustrations on the world. So, you know, like being a teenager is hard enough without having to be the heir to the throne and deal with all this politics at the same time. So, you know, I think that Rhaenyra is not acting in like a politically smart way. And she's also not making it easy for her father. But, you know, I think that's realistic. I think that's how teenagers are sometimes. I mean, there is that idea of like, you know, do medieval people get to be teenagers? Because, you know, in this world, when you turn 16, you're considered an adult. So you're not really allowed to have this idea of having a sort of rebellious teenage transition between childhood and adulthood. You're meant to just turn 16 and start popping out sprogs and cutting off heads, because welcome to Westeros. Thanks for the super chat from Sporian, who says, someone get that pug some more cake. Yes, there was a pug, which I enjoyed so much. Where was the pug? The pug was in the scene where, we got to see Larys Strong, actually. We got to talk about Larys Strong. Where was bloody Larys Strong? So, yeah, all right. So we had this, you know, royal tent where everyone was hanging out before the hunt. And by the way, what a tent. Can you imagine being the guy who has to carry all of the decorative jugs and vases to decorate the tent? What a ridiculous luxury. But we had all of the women folk who had come along for the hunt. And of course, the men go riding and the women stay and they gossip. And some of the gossip was quite interesting, actually. So one of the women says, one of Lord Swan's ships sailed through the Stepstones, and Lord Swan's daughter, Johanna Swan, was abducted by the Triarchy. And that's a detail that's taken straight out of the books. So the Stepstones, this whole war that's going on, It's happening because these dickheads called the Triarchy have taken over the Stepstones Islands, and they're in an important shipping route, and so Corlys wants to remove them. And in the books, it talks about how when the Triarchy took over the Stepstones, Westeros didn't mind at first. And, Viserys says so in episode 1 of this show. He says, oh, the Triarchy has killed the pirates on the Stepstones? Great. Less pirates. That's a good thing. That's good news. And that is from the book. Like, the Westeros was like, cool, great. I'm glad the Triarchy have replaced the pirates. But then the Triarchy became worse than the pirates. The Triarchy started taxing everyone who came through the Stepstones. And these taxes were so heavy that they were worse than the bloody pirates ever were. And not only were the Triarchy taxing people, they started kidnapping and enslaving people who came through the Stepstones. Specifically, they took girls and boys to be taken as sex slaves in the pleasure houses of Lys. So they were straight up selling people into sexual slavery, which was, what started to make Westeros angry and started seeing the Triarchy and the Crab Feeder as enemies. And Johanna Swan is one of the people who got taken by the Triarchy and sold into sexual slavery. And the books mention that, and by the way, Johanna Swan actually did pretty well in the pleasure houses and became like the ruler of the brothel, and she was known as the Black Swan, and she was... Wait, was it the Black Swan? That's like that Aronofsky movie, isn't it? Basically, George Martin just started having a Black Swan fantasy about a girl taking over a brothel. There's a lot of sort of young people getting involved in salacious sexual activities in the book, which it's a bit much. I think. There's a lot of it, and I think that Hot D has mostly sidestepped it. But it's straight from the books, and it is really nice to see how closely the show is sticking to the books. Like, so many of these little details are from the books. Thanks for the super chat from... Oh, yeah, and the pug. Did we see the pug? I did love that someone was, like, feeding their pug cake from the plate. And it is hilarious. Like, it's like in Dune. In the David Lynch Dune movie, the Atreides just had a pug. And Patrick Stewart rode into battle carrying a pug in the Dune movie. It's just bizarre. I almost feel it's a similar vibe with this pug. I like it very much. But we also met Larys Strong. So Larys Strong is this fellow here, and he is the younger son of Lionel Strong, and he is the younger brother of Harwin Strong, who we haven't properly met yet. And while Harwin Strong is like a badass knight who's like the strongest warrior in the realm, supposedly, Larys Strong has a club foot. He has like a oddly shaped foot, which means that he can't walk comfortably. He has this cane and he can't fight. And so Larys Strong has other ways that he operates in the world. It's a little bit like Tyrion Lannister is a dwarf, so, he can't be a warrior, so he uses his mind and he uses his wits and he finds other ways of having a place in the world. And, I thought it was really interesting how Larys came in and he said, like, the gods have not shaped me for the hunt, so can I sit with the women? And so it really frames it as like a gendered thing. Larys can't fit into the male gender role, so therefore he takes on the more feminine role of, sitting and eating cookies. And I love his like side eye. Like, Rhaenyra insults one of these ladies by saying that she eats cake. And Larys Strong is just sitting here taking in the gossip. So, I won't spoil his role in the future, but it's interesting to see Larys just observing, just watching, just listening, and we'll see where that leads. Keep your eyes on Larys Strong. Thanks for the super chat from Sebastian. We talked about the grayscale. I think it's possible that the crab feeder's form of grayscale was a non-contagious form, like Shireen, and so I think that's why Daemon may not get grayscale from the crab feeder. Thanks for the super chat from Jenxes, who says, lots of death and symbolism this episode. Thoughts on Viserys killing the stag and Daemon killing the Velaryon knight by landing on him? Yeah, that was kind of a ridiculous moment where this Velaryon knight was like, begging for mercy from the skies, and he's saying, yeah, Daemon has come to save the day, and then Daemon's dragon Caraxes instantly just steps on this guy and squashes him, which I think comes across as almost a comedic moment. But yeah, when you really think about it, it's bloody awful that this knight knew that he was going to be eaten alive by crabs, and I think he was begging for Daemon to burn him with fire so he didn't have to get eaten alive by crabs. It's really very dark. But the fact that, Daemon and Caraxes just stomped on him, it does sort of suggest that Daemon doesn't give a shit about people very much. You gotta remember that this whole war, the whole reason Daemon is here and, burning hundreds of men alive is because he wants glory, he wants attention, he wants validation, he wants to prove how big his dick is by burning a bunch of people alive. The fact that Daemon didn't want Viserys' help, the fact that he was angry about Viserys sending him reinforcements, shows that it's not about winning the war. He's not just being pragmatic. He wants to personally win. He wants to do it himself to prove how tough he is. He's a bit of a dickhead, is all I'm trying to say. A lot of people, in the fandom are saying, Daemon's a cool guy, he's not really that bad. The showrunner, Ryan Condal, said that, Daemon's not a monster, he loves his family at heart. But can we remember that in episode 1, Daemon was killing these, civilians who were supposedly they were criminals and murderers. We saw Daemon with his gold cloaks killing all these people. And we saw Daemon, taking great pleasure in, killing a guy personally, cutting off all these hands. In the books, it says that, Daemon took delight in mutilating people, which seems like the textbook definition of evil to me. If you have to kill somebody, that's one thing. But if you are enjoying mutilating people who, may or may not really be guilty of anything, seems to me that Daemon is pretty evil, but, that's up to interpretation. Thanks for the super chat from Philippe, who enjoyed Viserys' binge drinking. Thanks for the super chat from Nono, who says, the first sigil in the intro is the Doom and the 3 dragons fleeing in the top right corner, barely visible, a hint of them causing it. Ooh, that's an interesting point, Nono. So yes, the first image in the intro sequence is of the Doom of Valyria, which is when the old empire of the Dragon Lords was destroyed in a mysterious catastrophe. Volcanoes erupted, sulfur fell from the skies. It might have been related to magic, it might have been related to the Faceless Men, but one of the theories about the Doom is that it may have been caused by the Targaryens. Because, it's very interesting that the Targaryens found out it was going to happen before it happened, and that's how they escaped it. And the Targaryens say that, my daughter Daenerys the Dreamer, she had a dream about the Doom, and that's why we left. But some people say, that's a bit of a convenient excuse. What if the Targaryens deliberately caused the Doom of Valyria by, say, hiring Faceless Men to assassinate the sorcerers who kept the 14 flames from erupting? Maybe the Targaryens caused the Doom to make themselves the only dragon riders in the world. Because the books mention how the Targaryens were not one of the most powerful families in Valyria. They were one of the lesser houses. It sounds like there were sort of dozens of powerful families and houses. The Targaryens were one of the less powerful houses in Valyria. So by the destruction of Valyria, the Targaryens went from one of the less powerful dragon riding families to the only dragon riding family. So maybe the Targaryens did the Doom. And Nono points out that it looks as though you can slightly see some dragons flying away from Valyria in the background here. Maybe that represents the Targaryens leaving, having caused the Doom maybe. But that's just a theory. Thanks for the super chat from Davey, who says, do the boars in A Song of Ice and Fire like attacking royalty? Can't blame Bloodraven for that one. Yeah, so, there is a fun theory that, in Game of Thrones Book 1, Season 1, when Robert Baratheon gets killed by a boar, some people theorize that Bloodraven may have sent the boar. So Bloodraven is the tree dude He's this guy who trains Bran in how to be a tree wizard. And in the books, this guy Bloodraven has a very long and complicated and cool history, which you can learn all about in the Alt Shift X video about Bloodraven. And Bloodraven, one of his powers is that, as a green seer with the magic of the old gods, Bloodraven can control animals, just like Bran can. And so there's a lot of hints that Bloodraven has been using his powers to influence events. This guy, Jor Mormont, the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, who, is Jon's mentor, Jor Mormont in the books has a raven, which is sort of comic relief, like it keeps asking for corn all the time and stuff. But the raven occasionally does things that seem suspiciously intelligent and political. Like the raven helps Jon Snow become the new Lord Commander of the Night's Watch because it says snow, snow, like the raven talks. And the raven also like appears on Jon's chest and like squawks at him while Jon is having a dream about the White Walkers and the Long Night, it seems to be. So it seems as though Bloodraven is controlling the raven from afar as a way of influencing events, possibly like he gave Jon that dream. So since the raven is manipulating events, maybe there are other animals that Bloodraven is using to influence events. Maybe Bloodraven sent the pig that killed King Robert. I don't think that's likely to be true, but it is a fun theory. It's also suggested that maybe Bloodraven controlled the direwolves that came to the Stark children at the start of the book. Like maybe Bloodraven is the reason Bran got the wolf and became a warg, because that led to Bran being Bloodraven's student. But, that's not super relevant. Thanks for the super chat from Alexander, who says, love the symbolism, three-way parallel between Viserys's purely ritual hunt, whereas Rhaenyra killing in a real fight for her life, versus Daemon hunting a human. Yeah, I like the sort of falseness of, Viserys, quote-unquote, hunts this deer, but he doesn't personally chase down the deer. They just present the deer to him so that Viserys can kill him. It's not a real hunt. It's not a real accomplishment by Viserys, and it's just this sort of horrible, unnecessary killing. It didn't mean anything. Whereas Rhaenyra killed this boar that was attacking her. It was a real, like, hot-blooded, violent situation. Whereas, Daemon went and killed a human for his own sort of reasons. So it was sort of three different kinds of violence for different reasons that each say something about their character. Like, Viserys didn't even seem to want to kill the deer. He just sort of did it because he had to. Didn't really mean anything, but he just sort of felt obliged. Whereas Rhaenyra was like letting out her feelings when she killed the boar, and there was sort of real danger to it. So it's sort of understandable, that she did that, but also it was very scary. How she just stabbed the shit out of it and there was blood all over her, and, it was a bit scary how Rhaenyra got so violent for no good reason. And Daemon was just being a dickhead. I mean, yes, he was ending the war in the Stepstones, but he did it in the way that created the most possible personal glory for him, and he used a false peace banner, which is a really, dick move that undermines the conventions of war. So, these three acts of violence each say a very different thing about each character. I also really, really enjoyed Viserys talking about his dreams. So Viserys revealed something new here. Viserys said that he had a dream about having a male son and a male heir. And the reason why he chose Rhaenyra to be his heir instead was because he gave up believing in his dream of having a son. He sort of lost faith in his dream. I no longer believed, he said. He changed his mind, but now that he has Aegon, he's starting to have doubts. He's like, oh no, my dream about having a son did come true after all. And so now he's like, maybe I made a mistake by naming Rhaenyra, is sort of his thought. And it's interesting that, since Viserys did not find the White Hart, he found a normal deer instead. That suggests that, well, okay, the mystical sign of the heir did not appear for Aegon. The White Hart is the symbol of kingship, and we did not find it on Aegon's special hunt. So maybe that confirms to Viserys that, yes, okay, well, maybe Aegon is not the one who should be heir, it should be Rhaenyra. And I think that another like layer to the reason why Viserys wants Rhaenyra instead of Aegon is that Viserys told Rhaenyra about the secret about Aegon's dream, Aegon's prophecy about the White Walkers. That's part of why Viserys wants Rhaenyra to inherit the throne, because she knows about that important dream. Whereas Aegon is a baby, he can't very well say to baby Aegon, oh, by the way, little goo goo gaga baby, there's going to be White Walkers and you're going to have to kill them. Viserys might be dead by the time Aegon is, grown up enough to understand the importance of that dream and that prophecy. So, Viserys has entrusted Rhaenyra with it because she's old enough. So, I think that's part of Viserys's reasoning. But like this whole idea, like we can see how tortured Viserys is about this dream that he had and doubting his dreams and following his dreams, but the dream's not coming true. And that's one of the themes throughout the books and the story, is that dreams can fuck you up. Like wanting your dreams to come true, misinterpreting them, doubting yourself, they can destroy you. There's a character in The Hedge Knight, in Dunk and Egg, called Daeron the Drunken. And he's a Targaryen who is tortured by his dreams, and he sort of misinterprets them and wants them to come true, but like he feels inadequate, and he has all this like father issues, because every bloody character in the books has father issues, but he has these dream issues, and that's ultimately what destroys him. His brother Aemon, Maester Aemon from the main series, says that, dreams destroyed my brothers, every one. And I think we're seeing the same thing happen to Viserys. His dreams, his ambitions, his hopes, and his conflicted feelings about them are destroying him. Thanks for the super chat from Captrick, who says, Rhaenyra and Alicent barely even seem like friends anymore. The royal marriage really made things worse for them. Yeah, I mean that's part of the thing about, teenage friendships, is that they can be really intense, but they can also be brief, because people are changing so much when they're young. And I think Alicent and Rhaenyra have changed in different ways. They've sort of diverged. Like, Alicent uses very formal language with Rhaenyra. The king wishes for you to join us. Like, it's all very formal and proper. And that is, of course, how the Queen Alicent, should behave, because she's the wife of the king and she needs to be formal and proper. And also she's focusing on her children. I'm sure she's spent a lot of time with her children, which means she's not spending time with Rhaenyra. And so Rhaenyra has been left alone and feeling resentful and feeling angry that her best friend betrayed her by marrying her dad without telling her it was happening, and is doing her own thing. And also, of course, there's the political undercurrent of, will Aegon be king, or will Rhaenyra have the throne? So I think it's very understandable that this friendship has gotten so tough. And it's nice that they have this conversation under the weirwood tree in the Red Keep Godswood, because that's where we saw them being such good friends in episode 1. They were so close and they were so intimate in this exact place. But a few years later in the same place, and and the situation's changed. And Alicent is wearing a red dress, which not only matches the weirwood leaves very nicely, but the red dress is the Targaryen color, which evokes her Targaryen political ambitions, putting Aegon on the throne to replace Rhaenyra. And, Alicent does not seem like 100% on board the whole making her baby the king thing. That's more Otto's thing. That's more Otto's desire. But I think we can see Alicent more and more internalizing Otto's desires and Otto's ambitions. She is learning from Otto. So we'll see how that develops. Thanks for the super chat from Daniel, who says, hope you're having a good day. Thank you, Daniel. I hope you're having a good day. Thanks for the super chat from Emma, who says, any continuity with Viserys losing his finger to rot or any of his other injuries? Continuity. Well, yeah, I mean, there is some similar stuff in the book, but, we'll have to see what happens. But yeah, I really enjoyed someone in No in the super chat pointed out that, maybe if Viserys cut off the finger in the first place, this never would have happened. Because in the previous episode, the Maesters were telling Viserys, like, oh, this is the best chance of saving the digit. Like, we won't have to cut off your finger if we use the maggots to, heal your finger and get rid of the rot. But, like, we'll be able to save the finger. But clearly that didn't work, because it's just gotten worse and worse. So maybe the Maesters were wrong. Maybe they should have cut off the finger, then he'd be fine. And I think that's a nice metaphor about Viserys not taking decisive action when he should. Matt in the live chat says, I saw a Joffrey Valerion. Yeah, so I think that was a mistake in the subtitles. The subtitles have not been great sometimes in this season, actually. Because, yeah, there is a character called Joffrey, but he's not Joffrey Valerion. He is Joffrey Lonmouth. And Joffrey Lonmouth is a friend of Laenor Valerion. And we may learn more in future episodes. But I think the subtitles mistakenly called this person Joffrey Valerion when he's actually Joffrey Lonmouth. In the books, Joffrey Lonmouth is called the Knight of Kisses because the Lonmouth sigil has red lips on it as well as skulls. And Lonmouth, there's a character called Richard Lonmouth who was the squire of Rhaegar Targaryen in the time of Robert's Rebellion. And I think there's a theory that Radio Westeros advanced that Richard Lonmouth is now Lem. No, not Lem. Lem? Yeah, well, go check out Radio Westeros. They'll sort you out about Richard Lonmouth. Thanks for the super chat from Liam, who just says, do you think Daemon is going to get grayscale? Probably not. But I think it's probably the dormant form of grayscale that Crabfeeder had, like Shireen. Thanks for the super chat from Camillo, who says, did you catch the guy with the Blackfire logo? Hola Juan. I did not catch a guy with the Blackfire logo. I mean, I did say that there was the Master of Revels in episode 1 who had a black dragon on his belly. So the black dragon sigil in the future, in the Blackfire Rebellions era, so years after House of the Dragon, but years before Game of Thrones, there was this conflict called the Blackfire Rebellions, and you can learn all about the Blackfire Rebellions in the Alt-Shift-X video about the Blackfire Rebellions. Yeah, this is the Blackfire sigil, and that has a great deal of significance in the Blackfire period. But, in this time, the Blackfires don't exist yet, so I don't think the Black Dragon has any special significance now. I mean, part of the tradition is that when you have a bastard, sometimes the bastard has a reversed heraldry, like the colors are reversed. Like House Stark is normally a grey direwolf on white, but Jon Snow, in theory, would have a white direwolf on grey, like a reversed colors is what a bastard has sometimes, and that's why the Blackfire dragon is black, because you reverse the colors when you have a bastard, and the Blackfires were a bastard line of the Targaryens. But yeah, my point is that I don't think the Blackfire sigil is super significant right now. No says, what was in it for Crabfeeder? A promised cure? I mean, yeah, that's a good question. Like why was the Crabfeeder doing all this? Like, we didn't get any dialogue from him at all, I don't think. So, we don't really know what his motivations are. I mean, we talked in the previous episode, or Viserys talked about how, Crabfeeder is funded by the Triarchy, by the cities of Lys and Myr and Tyrosh. And so, and Corlys, I think, said that the Triarchy is trying to weaken Westeros. So, this is a political power grab type thing. I mean, also, the Crabfeeder is making money. Like, at least in the books, they're taxing all of the trade that goes through the Narrow Sea, and they're making a bunch of money, which is presumably going back to the Triarchy. So, partly this is about money, partly this is about political power. And I think for the Crabfeeder, he clearly enjoys feeding people to the crabs. I mean, maybe he just loves crabs. He's a real environmentalist. He has a bond with the crab people. Maybe he made a deal with the Merling King. In the books, there is stuff about the Deep Ones, which are like these Lovecraftian fish monsters that may or may not be connected to the religion of the Drowned One, the Drowned God on the Iron Islands. Maybe he made a deal with Cthulhu, Crab Thulu. Maybe that's what's going on. Thanks for the super chat from Ty, who says, play this song when Corlys comes to aid Daemon. Watch it in your own time. Sorry, guys. Thanks for the super chat from Kristen, who says, Kristen almost stabbed Rhaenyra in the face. Yeah, that was a bit of a close thing, wasn't it? Kristen just put the sword through the boar in such a way that almost cut Rhaenyra. Yeah, it's interesting seeing the bond between Rhaenyra and Kristen develop. It's a little bit flirtatious. Like there was a moment when Rhaenyra asked Kristen, like, "Oh, so you single?" is kind of like what she was asking Kristen. And Kristen said, "Yeah, I had an adventurous youth." But never a formal betrothal. So he was just sort of bragging about like, yeah, I fuck, is what Kristen was saying. So I think there's definitely some sexual tension here. There's also a bit of tension between like Rhaenyra and Daemon on in episode 1 when he was like putting the necklace on her and stuff. Because obviously one of the plot points here is that Viserys is trying to get Rhaenyra to marry somebody, and so he suggests that Lord Jason Lannister, the Lord of Casterly Rock, the ancestor of Tywin and Cersei and Jaime and Tyrion, maybe Rhaenyra should marry him. That would make the Lannisters, allies of the throne, which would be great. Alongside, the Velaryons and the Hightowers, the Lannisters are, I think, the second most wealthy house in the realm behind the Velaryons. And I found Jason's like arrogant courtship quite funny. Like he really just walks up and says, "Hey girl, I got a lot of money. I got some real good wine. I could build a kennel for your dragons because I got a lot of money." And like he just has this blunt arrogance, and you sort of get the sense that Jason's moves have worked for him in the past because everyone he's met before now has been less rich and powerful than him. But for the first time in his life, he's trying to hit on someone who actually is in a higher social class than he is. Rhaenyra is a princess, which is even higher than him as lord. And all of a sudden, when he hasn't got like a status advantage, Rhaenyra is not impressed by his blustering brags. So I quite enjoyed her rejecting him. But yeah, in the books they talk a lot about how both Jason and his twin brother Tyland were trying to woo Rhaenyra by giving her lots of gifts. They mention a Blackwood and a Bracken fight, a duel for Rhaenyra's hand. Maybe this stuff will happen in the future, so I won't spoil anything. But lots of people want to hook up with Rhaenyra because she's the princess. Thanks for the super chat from El Diablo, who says, "Daemon going Rambo made me lol." I thought it was a little bit over the top. Like, I thought it was sort of fitting for Daemon's character that he would, misuse a peace banner. He would betray the Triarchy. Like, he does this dishonorable, balls out, almost suicidal thing. I think that kind of works. But I thought it was a bit silly how, like, the Triarchy and the Crab Feeder, they sent, like, 3 dudes at a time for a while. like they're like, let's send 3 guys to kill Daemon, and then he kills them. Then they're like, yeah, let's send another 3 guys to kill Daemon. It's like, why don't they just send all their guys at once? I mean, I guess the idea is that the Triarchy men are afraid that Caraxes is going to come and burn them all. So I guess that makes sense. Like, they're really reluctant to go out and fight him. But it's like, why don't they just stay in their caves then, or just like, I don't know. And so many arrows missed Daemon. Like, there were all these guys shooting arrows, and most of them, like, they all missed until, like, quite a while in. But yeah, in terms of, like, Daemon's character, I think it makes sense that he's balls out. He's got almost a suicidal belief in his ability to kill everybody. And it worked for him. It paid off. Like, that's what I think is significant. Like, they talk inside the episode, the creators said that Daemon has really, like, come out of this reforged into, like, a new man. He's reborn. And I think that, part of it is that he did this crazy, violent, reckless, dishonorable thing by misusing a peace banner and attacking and doing this crazy thing. And it worked for him. It paid off. He got validation. He got victory by doing the crazy thing. So I think we can expect Daemon to be even more, like, balls out and violent in the future because it worked for him this time, Thanks for the super chat from Daedrian and from Unsourced, who says, "So, Kristen and Rhaenyra are totally going to have a torrid affair, right?" Well, look, I mean, once you've killed a boar together, you've really just become intimate by virtue of slaying a boar, haven't you? What happens in the Kingswood stays in the Kingswood, Thanks for the super chat from Sam, who says, "Who were the other dragons and their riders?" So currently, the dragon riders in this world are, let me pull up the family tree for you. So originally, King Viserys had the dragon Balerion, but Balerion died. Princess Rhaenys Targaryen has the dragon Meleys, the Red Queen. We have not seen Meleys yet. The new dragon we saw this episode was Laenor Velaryon's dragon called Sea Smoke. That was the dragon that saved Daemon during the battle. This is Sea Smoke, which is a very lovely silvery colored, grey colored dragon. And obviously Rhaenyra has the dragon Syrax, the yellow dragon. And Daemon Targaryen has the red dragon Caraxes, the squeaky, snaky, penis-necked one. And so far, that's all the dragon riders, isn't it? It's Rhaenys with Meleys, it's Laenor with Sea Smoke, and it's Rhaenyra with Syrax. But there are a bunch of other dragons. Like, there's at least like a dozen other dragons that are living in the dragon pit or are hatchlings, and they've been ridden by like previous generations of Targaryens. Like King Jaehaerys's dragon Vermithor, the Bronze Fury, is a big old dragon who's still around, and Alysanne's dragon Silverwing. And they mentioned a Dreamfire, so there are lots of dragons that are around that we, maybe we'll see them in the future. And also Laena Velaryon was asking about Vhagar, which is the biggest, toughest dragon in the world, which is currently sitting on a beach in Florida. Thanks for the super chat from Bandywine, who says, best episode so far, dripping with atmosphere and George's touch. I'm surprisingly endeared to Lionel Strong, who is actually giving Viserys prudent and sincere advice. Yeah, I mean, it seems like Lionel is the one guy who actually is just not biased. Like, Otto wants his grandson Aegon on the throne, and Corlys wants his grandchildren on the throne if, someone marries a Velaryon. Whereas Lionel is saying, no, like, don't marry my children. I don't want to join the royal family. Marry the Velaryons, because that's best for you, So it seems as though Lionel actually has the royal family's interests at heart. Or maybe Lionel has Corlys's interests at heart. We've never seen, like, a conversation between Corlys and Lionel, but I wonder if there might be a connection, like a reason why Lionel is sort of advocating the interests of the Velaryons. Thanks for the super chat from Alex, who says, how many bad omens can one king have? Yeah, it's not good. It's not good. His baby Balon died, and the deer, and the stolen dragon egg, and there's a lot that's gone wrong. Thanks for the super chat from Eliza Bitty, who says, I find it interesting that Viserys lost 2 fingers, and he also lost 2 of his closest counsel, Daemon and Corlys. Yeah, that's a cool point. Like, at the same time that parts of Viserys's body are falling off, his allies and his family are falling off from him. Like, Rhaenyra seems to be, more distant from him, and like Corlys and Daemon have left. So yeah, like he's falling to pieces, and his family is falling to pieces at the same time. Like, it was interesting how, like, Alicent gave Viserys this mended dragon statue, which is like, maybe Alicent can glue things together, but it seems like the opposite is happening. It seems as though Alicent is part of the problem, in that this, Hightower versus Rhaenyra rift is opening up. Thanks for the super chat from Betsy, who says, thanks for taking us back to the best English class vibes with Game of Thrones. Raise your hand if you have a question, class. Thanks for the super chat from Stefan, who says, I thought Daemon was badass, but I wanted to see a 1v1 against the crab feeder. How was he able to kill him in the dark caves on his turf? Yeah, well, now that you say that, like, they could have done some, like, cool thing where, like, Daemon is, creeping through the dark caves, and maybe the crab feeder has, like, traps and things and ambushes planned to kill Daemon. I think that given what little we know about the crab feeder, it would be cool if he was, like, setting traps and using his home turf, and maybe they could have done something cool with the crab feeder. But I think in terms of, like, a 1v1 fight, like, at least from the crab feeder's appearance, like, he doesn't look strong. He doesn't look tough. He's riddled with disease. Like, I think Daemon would absolutely butcher this guy, as he did. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm not too mad about not seeing a fight. Thanks for the super chat from Andre, who says, could you talk more about the Lannister guy who Viserys was trying to marry Rhaenyra off to? Yeah, so this guy is Lord Jason Lannister, and he has a twin called Tybalt Lannister. And they're rich, they're Lannisters, they're crafty, they're scheming. There isn't really much description of them in the books that I can tell you about, but they will have a role in the future. I can tell you that the Lannisters have a sort of interesting history in Fire and Blood, the book that this is based on. So it was very interesting that Jason Lannister said here, hey, by the way, I have a whole bunch of money. I could build a dragon pit in Casterly Rock. And what he means by that is that if Rhaenyra marries Jason Lannister and moves to Casterly Rock, Rhaenyra could house her dragon Syrax at Casterly Rock. And that itself is sort of an interesting power play for House Lannister, saying, hey, we could have dragons at Casterly Rock. House Lannister could have dragons. Because, like, you know, if Jason Lannister married Rhaenyra and had children, those children could be dragon riders, right? Like, just in the same way that Laenor Velaryon is a non-Targaryen dragon rider because he has Targaryen blood from Rhaenys, maybe there could be a Lannister dragon rider if Rhaenyra married Jason Lannister. That would be crazy, and that would make the Lannisters so much more powerful if they had dragons. It would also probably make the realm a lot more unstable, because the more families there are with dragons, the more potential for, you know, terribly destructive wars. And that is something that happened previously in the book Fire and Blood. So, like, a couple of generations ago, King Jaehaerys' sister Rhaena Targaryen, had a bit of a difficult relationship with King Maegor the Cruel. And so she sort of fled and she lived in the Westerlands for a while. She lived on this island called Fair Isle. And she had a dragon there, Dreamfire, the same dragon that was mentioned in a previous episode. And eventually she left Fair Isle because the Farmans were annoyed that the dragon was eating all of their sheep. And Rhaena and Dreamfire stayed at Casterly Rock. So Casterly Rock has hosted a dragon before. And the Lord at the time, I think it was Lord Lyman Lannister, was saying, hey, Rhaena, like, you should totally marry my son. You should totally, you know, hang out with us Lannisters. You know, and by the way, I noticed that your dragon has been laying all these eggs. Maybe you could give me one of those eggs, you know, as a present. Since I've been such a good host, you should totally give a dragon to the Lannisters. Yeah, that'd be great. And, you know, Rhaena was like, no, I'm not going to give you a dragon. I'm not going to marry your son, A, because I'm gay, and B, because I'm not going to give a dragon to the Lannisters. We talk a little bit about this story in the What's West of Westeros Alt Shift X video, which is about Alyssa Farman and Rhaena and their affair. But yeah, so my point is that the Lannisters in the book have a history of trying to get marriages and power and dragons from the Targaryens, and I think we're seeing a continuation of that now. And yeah, like, one of the things that the book says is that, you know, the Lannisters, they were kings once, because, you know, all of the different kingdoms that existed before Aegon the Conqueror turned up, before Aegon the Conqueror came and conquered Westeros and made it into one realm, there were hundreds of kingdoms in Westeros. Like, they talk about 7 kingdoms, but, you know, even before that, there were just lots of small, petty kings, lots of little warring lordlings and kingdoms, and the Lannisters were one of the most powerful kings in their area at one point. And at one point they were the kings of the Westerlands, the kings of the Rock. And it was Aegon who came along and ended that and made them into lords instead, made all of the great lords bow to him. But the point is that, you know, the Lannisters, they were kings once, not all that long ago. It was like 100 years ago the Lannisters were kings. And they didn't have to bow to anyone. And I think that at this point, there is still some ambition where they would like to return to that level of power by getting dragons, by marrying into the Targaryen throne. By the time of Game of Thrones, you know, the memory of dragons, the memory of independent kingship is a little bit more distant and faded. But it was only a few generations ago that these lords were kings. Thanks for the super chat from Darth Cruz, who says, please talk about Sea Smoke. There isn't a whole lot to say about Sea Smoke. I think Sea Smoke is a young dragon, like a hatchling dragon. Laenor Velaryon is the first rider of Sea Smoke. So it's a young dragon. It's said to be quite a beautiful dragon with its sort of smoky grey color. And Laenor has been riding it since a very young age in the books. And, you know, that's part of why Laenor was relevant in the Harrenhal Council. Like, in the TV show, the Harrenhal Council, they were mostly talking about Rhaenys Targaryen or Viserys Targaryen. That was, like, the two main candidates to become the heir to the throne at the Harrenhal Council in Episode 1. But in the book, Laenor Velaryon, Rhaenys' son, was the main candidate, not Rhaenys. Partly because Laenor was a dragon rider, had sea smoke, whereas Viserys didn't have a dragon because Balerion was dead. But, you know, Laenor at the time was like 7 years old, so they didn't want a 7-year-old to be heir, so that's part of why he wasn't chosen. But yeah, there's not a whole lot that I can say about sea smoke in the books as yet. Thanks for the super chat from Dopey Dragon, who says, I feel like Laenor being a dragon rider was not really given much time or weight before we just see him blasting. Being a rider should be a big deal. It should be a big deal. It should be a big deal. I mean, that is one of the things that makes the Velaryons so important. I mean, like, you know, I guess I've said in the past that, you know, Viserys has to marry someone, and, you know, the Hightowers are good allies, and the Velaryons are good allies. So, you know, either one is reasonable. But yeah, I agree. Like, the fact that the Velaryons have two dragons, Laenor has Sea Smoke and Rhaenys has Meleys, the fact that the Velaryons have two dragons, like, half the dragon riders in the world are Velaryons, not Targaryens, alongside, you know, Daemon and Rhaenyra. So it really should be a huge concern and a huge consideration that, hey, we need to be friends with the Velaryons. We need to marry them into the royal family. Because if we have dragon riders who are pissed off at us and who are not on our side, we have a huge fucking problem. I mean, like, that's the whole thing. Like, Targaryen dominance comes from their dragons. And right now, the Velaryons have as many dragons as the Targaryens do. So the Velaryons are potentially an enormous threat that could wipe out the Targaryens potentially right now. And I agree, they really should be talking about that. That really should be a concern. Viserys' choice to marry Alicent, not Laena, was probably a massive fuck-up because he forgot about the dragons. Thanks for the super chat from Quoth the Raven. Thanks for the super chat from Emily, who says, I felt like the deer who is screaming and restrained and sacrificed in the name of Viserys' son reminded him of Emma. I think that's a great point, Emily. I think you're right. Like, the way that I think that's a fantastic parallel, because he really thinks about it. He's like, oh, I've got to make the decision to slaughter this deer. Just like in Season 1, Episode 1, when Viserys was told, hey, you need to kill Emma now. We need to cut Emma open and get the baby out, which was this moment here. And yeah, it felt like this sacrifice that Viserys was making. We must sacrifice my wife to birth a baby. And yeah, it's a similar moment here with the deer, where, you know, the choice is presented to him. They had the deer all tied up for him, just like Emma was held down when she was cut open. So yeah, I agree. I think that's a really good parallel. Thanks for the super chat from Alexander, who says, I was surprised what a loser Lord Lannister was. Have you ever met a billionaire before? I think there's a kind of arrogance and entitlement that makes very wealthy and privileged people unable to relate to others. Like, the way that Jason Lannister, he, like, snapped his fingers to make someone bring him wine. He just snapped his fingers and it appeared, and he did not even, like, acknowledge the person who brought him wine. I mean, like, you know, I guess that's just normal for all these lords and things. But you know, in this case, I think it really highlighted his arrogance and douchiness. The Lannisters are kind of historically giant douches. I mean, one of the sort of most unrealistic things about Game of Thrones is that, you know, the Starks have kind of always been stern and honorable, and the Lannisters have kind of always been cunning and ambitious and dickheads and blonde. Like, there are certain personality traits, and, like, you know, the Baratheons tend to be fiery warriors and very masculine and very, you know, prone to bouts of rage and emotion. There is a certain, like, common personality that has stayed the same over like hundreds of years of history. Like, not to mention the Lannisters have somehow like stayed blonde this whole time. It's like, aren't they marrying other families? It's not like like the Targaryens are incestuous. Like, if you look at the genetics, the genetics of the Targaryens is ridiculous because since they keep marrying their siblings, like Viserys is like 50% Aenys's genetics and 50% Alyssa Valerigon's genetics because they haven't like he only has one set of great grandparents. Like, he doesn't have 16 different great grandparents. He has 2 great grandparents because of the incest, the sibling incest. My point is that, for anyone other than the Targaryens, it seems ridiculous that they look the same and have the same personality after all these years. Anyway, thanks for the super chat from Charmander Master, who says, I liked Rhaenys and Alicent playing tug of war with the minstrel as a symbol for how royals fighting hurts the common person. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think part of the point of that was that it showed how Rhaenyra was saying, I'm the princess, so you have to obey me, so I want you to keep playing. Whereas Alicent said, but I'm the queen, and I want you to go away. And they sort of had this back and forth, where it's like, listen to me, no, listen to me. And in the end, the minstrel listened to Alicent, because Alicent is the queen, and the queen, apparently, outranks the princess. And so that just shows how, despite the fact that Rhaenyra is heir to the throne, despite the fact that she's the firstborn daughter of the king, Alicent is the one who has power, and that seems to contradict the fact that, all these lords, they bowed to Rhaenyra, they swore to obey Rhaenyra as heir, and yet Alicent is the one they are following. And so it's sort of this undercurrent of, despite what everyone says, baby Aegon is seen as the heir because he's male. So yeah, I agree, that was fun. And yeah, like the long-suffering common man who has to obey the whims of these teenagers and these drunk lords and all these dickheads just because they're highborn. Thanks for the super chat from Universe of Thrones. I don't know why the Targaryen sigil has 4 legs. I'm not sure if it really means much. The showrunner says that it connects to Daenerys used a 4-legged dragon sometimes. I don't know if it's a big deal. Thanks for the super chat from Evan, who says, it was awesome to see Viserys take a stand against that Lannister. It proves that he really does care about Rhaenyra. I mean, it was words, wasn't it? Because yeah, there was a conversation between Jason Lannister and Viserys, where Viserys sort of like, corrected Jason and said, no, like, Rhaenyra is my heir, not Aegon. And yeah, it was nice to see him stick up for Rhaenyra, but I mean, I think he needs to be a bit more loud and direct about telling everyone that. Like, I mean, the way that Viserys was just sort of like riling up Jason reminded me a lot of Lancel and Robert in season 1 of Game of Thrones. Like, remember when Robert Baratheon was drunk and he was just having an enormous amount of fun talking shit at Lancel Lannister. Like, it was the same situation. It was a drunk king. Well, this was at a tournament, not a hunt, but he was just talking shit at a Lannister because he had a lot of feelings and he was drunk. A very similar scene here. Thanks for the super chat from Quoth, who says, I feel like this was better than the Battle of the Bastards. I would have loved seeing Jon disembowel Ramsay and drag out his corpse. It was pretty metal the way Daemon dragged the crab feeder's corpse around, yeah. Yeah, I think it looked pretty good. I mean, I didn't love how over the top it was that Daemon like single-handedly killed like 20 dudes. He somehow dodged like 100 arrows before 2 arrows hit him. And after 2 arrows hit him, he didn't seem to care anymore. And also, like, did that arrow just go through his breastplate? Just punch through the metal? God damn. But then he like plucked them out. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I guess we got to suspend our disbelief. But it sort of reminds me in a bad way of Jon Snow at the start of the Battle of the Bastards. Like, remember when he was standing in front of the cavalry charge? He's just like facing it alone, and then he went through this crazy sequence where all these people threw themselves at him and he dodged all these arrows. It did feel very reminiscent of that. And like, personally, I like it when the violence is just a little bit more subdued and a little more realistic feeling. Like, I don't like it when the characters survive crazy odds over and over because it feels like they have plot armor. And I like it when Game of Thrones is a story where the heroes can die, where fucking up does lead to death sometimes. But, maybe we'll see that in the future. Thanks for the super chat from Tin and from Gabriella, who says, just to remind the chat that Targaryens are not immune to grayscale because Maegel Targaryen died of grayscale. Yeah, so there is this thing about Targaryens being resistant to disease. This is a image of Maegel by Sofia Golovanova. And there is this idea that Targaryens don't get sick. Which is not true all of the time. The Targaryens seem to think that Targaryens never get sick, but sometimes they do. There was this plague that killed King Daeron II, and a bunch of people. Several plagues have killed a bunch of Targaryens, and that includes, grayscale. So Maegel was one of the daughters of King Jaehaerys and Queen Alysanne Targaryen. And she died of grayscale because she became a scepter. She became like a nun, and she was caring for some people who were sick with grayscale, and she caught grayscale from the patient and died. So, Targaryens do seem to tend to be resistant to disease a lot of the time, but they're not totally resistant to disease. It's a little bit like, Targaryens do seem to be a little bit resistant to heat and fire in the books. But they are not totally immune to fire. Like Daenerys gets burned in the books. Whereas in the TV show, it seems as though, at least in the original TV show, it seems as though Targaryens, at least Daenerys Targaryen, is totally immune to fire in the show. Thanks for the super chat from Gandalf, who says, isn't Shireen's grayscale cured by lords Stannis summoned from across Westeros? In the TV show, yes. In the books, they didn't say that they did anything special. Like in the books, there are forms of grayscale that just naturally stop and don't kill you. It usually affects children specifically. And there's different forms. Some of them kill you, some of them don't. In the behind-the-scenes stuff, last episode, they said that Crab Feeder's grayscale is progressing, it seems as though the reason why Crab Feeder wears this mask is to sort of hide the gross grayscale stuff. It's interesting that one of Crab Feeder's eyes looks kind of foggy, as though maybe that eye has gone blind, because grayscale does eventually make you blind. It's really nasty grayscale. Like there's one of Euron and Balon Greyjoy's brothers got grayscale, and there's this really horrible description in the book of how this child was slowly dying from the grayscale and like couldn't move or do anything anymore, but he was still alive and he was still breathing, bedbound. And then Euron Greyjoy, because Euron Greyjoy is the most horrifying evil character in the books, Euron Greyjoy came and just like pinched his brother's nose shut because his like mouth was like grayscaled close, and he was mostly stone, but he was still breathing through his nose. And Euron just came along and pinched his brother's nose shut so that he like suffocated to death and asphyxiated while he was incapacitated by the grayscale. And then Euron said that he went and pissed into the sea, and he cursed the gods, and he said, if the gods are real, then kill me for the crime of killing my brother, because kinslaying is a horrible crime. But the gods did not strike Euron down, so he figures that since he could kill his brother with grayscale, then he can do whatever he likes. He'll do any blasphemy. If God won't stop him, he'll be his own god. And you can watch the Euron Greyjoy video by AltShiftX if you want to know more about Euron. Thanks for the super chat from Victor. Targaryens are not immune to grayscale. Maegel got it. Thanks for the super chat from Brian, who says, did we talk about how silly it was when Daemon soloed like 20 dudes? I agree. I think that was silly. There is artwork in the Fire and Blood book that shows Daemon killing Kragas. In the book, they say that Daemon Targaryen beheaded Kragas Crabfeeder with a swing of his blade Dark Sister. So this is what it looks like in the illustrations in the book, Daemon killing the Crabfeeder. So you'll notice that in the book, Crabfeeder does not have a Sons of the Harpy mask, he does not have grayscale. I mean, the whole war is described in like a couple of paragraphs, like we don't get details. The details are created by the show. Thanks for the super chat from Jess, who says, do you think the show will reach the end of Fire and Blood? No, because Fire and Blood covers 130 years of history, from Aegon the Conqueror until some other characters. It covers many kings, many years. And I think that this show, House of the Dragon, I mean, it starts in chapter 12 of Fire and Blood, Heirs of the Dragon. And I think that it will end around chapter, like 15 or something, which is, I'm not going to spoil anything, but like the current story ends around like chapter 19, 18 or 19. And then there are a few more chapters after that about some other stuff. I don't think that this show will cover the book all the way to the end. I think it'll only cover chapters like 12 to 19 probably. And they say that they're going to do that in like 3 or 4 seasons total. But they've also said that, if House of the Dragon is a success, they might cover other historical periods. So, we were talking about the Blackfires before. It would be extremely cool if House of the Dragon did a few seasons to tell the story of the Blackfire rebellions. Or maybe they could tell the story of Aegon's conquest or Robert's rebellion, or, that there are lots of other historical periods they could cover. And I hope that we'll get to see them because there's some really cool other stories. And I think, I'm shocked by how good House of the Dragon is. I was a little bit worried that House of the Dragon might be bad, but so far I think it is doing a really good job, and it's staying very close to the books, but it's also adding a lot. And I think that they're making really good choices. I think that Ryan Condal and George R. R. Martin, who co-created this show, I think they've done a really good job so far. I think that probably my least favorite thing about this show so far is the Aegon's prophecy dream thing. I think that takes away some of the mystery, and I think that it sort of changes the moral meaning of this story. I think this story, as it's written in the book, it's sort of about the perils of ambition and power and drama and just hate and love and rivalries and feelings and lust. And I think that by making it about saving the world from Frosty Darth Maul instead, I think that sort of changes the meaning in a way that sort of undermines the point. But I mean, we're only 3 episodes in, so it remains to be seen what the sort of meaning will be in the end. Thanks for the super chat from Carlos, who says, rewatched Game of Thrones a few days ago, but the world in Hot D feels bigger. Is it the power of budget or better decisions by the showrunners? I mean, we talked before about how, Robert Baratheon going on a royal hunt in season 1 involved, 4 dudes walking in single file in a forest with a spear. Whereas this royal hunt is hundreds of people and horses and dogs and I think the reason for that is budget. But I think that, happily, it does fit the theme. Ryan Condal keeps going on about the decadence of this time. The royal family is way more powerful and rich and influential now than it is at the time of Game of Thrones. I mean that's sort of throughout, even in the books, there's a sense that the past was glorious and great and big, and now things have declined. Like all those big castles like Storm's End and Harrenhal and the Wall, all these great monuments, they were built in the past. They no longer have the power and the technology to do these things. There's an almost post-apocalyptic vibe. And also just like emotionally and socially, like so many of the characters like Ned Stark and Barristan Selmy, they think of the Robert's Rebellion era as being a better time. Things were better back then, and now everything's more corrupt, everything's more petty, everything's more small scale. And I think this is going back, and it's showing us when times were good. It's showing us when the splendor existed. It's showing us what we lost. Co-creator Ryan Condal compared it to Star Wars, when, like, in the Star Wars original trilogy, we hear about the Jedi, and Obi-Wan says, man, the Clone Wars, they sure were a crazy time. The lightsaber is an elegant weapon for a more civilized time. Is that the line Obi-Wan says in Star Wars? And then in the Star Wars prequels, we go back and we get to actually see what that great era looked like. We get to see what it looked like when there were hundreds of Jedi instead of just a few. Like, the Targaryens are like the Jedi, because in the main Game of Thrones show, there's only Daenerys and Viserys. There's only a couple of Targaryens left, whereas in the past there were lots, just like the Jedi, when we go back and see the height of the Jedi. And of course, it might make some people a little worried to hear the creators of House of the Dragon compare their story to the Star Wars prequels, because a lot of people don't like the Star Wars prequels. But I think that so far the Game of Thrones prequel is doing better than the Star Wars prequels were, at least in my opinion. Thank you for the super chat from Wes Pucci, who says, "What is up with the CGI? Different company." Yeah, I was not loving some of the CGI. I think like the boar specifically, just sort of this brown blur that flew in and knocked Kristen Cole sky high, in a way that I feel should have broken at least some of his bones. They seem to be sort of trying to keep the CGI off screen as much as possible. And yeah, there was also, the CGI deer, which looked okay, I guess. Some of the dragon flame, honestly, I think is not great. Some of the dragon flame looks like it was sort of, it just doesn't look like it's really there. But, maybe that's just me. I think it's okay. Thanks for the super chat from J.Am, who says, Viserys is neat. Different portrayal of a bad king. In Game of Thrones, we had Bobby B, who never went to a small council meeting. Viserys dutifully attends every meeting, but makes bad choices. Yeah, so, like, Viserys, as described in Fire and Blood, seems a bit more like Bobby B. This is the main illustration of King Viserys, Paddy Considine. This is him in the Fire and Blood illustration by Doug Wheatley. And, he is portrayed more as a indulgent drinker, eater, partier. He's more like Bobby B. The books say that Viserys, mostly left the governance of the realm to his hand, Otto. So it is a change that in the show, Viserys is much more involved and much more active, and he clearly really cares about trying to do the right thing. He just is not making great decisions, or at least he's not following through enough on his decisions. He's sort of compromising too much, is I think Viserys' problem. And yeah, I think that it's good that they've changed him like that to make him more distinct from the way he is in the book, which is, I think, perhaps too similar to Robert Baratheon. Thanks for the donation from James, who says, I really liked this episode, but I wish we got a bit more reaction to Hobart shouting basically treason by declaring Aegon second of his name. Yeah, it's a good point. So we had the scene where baby Aegon turned up to the hunt, and yeah, Hobart Hightower, here he is. He says, Aegon the Conqueror Babe, second of his name. And I think, traditionally, formally, properly, you only call someone Aegon the Second, Aegon the Third, Viserys the First, or Viserys the Second. You only say the number when they're king, because there have been many Aegons, like Aenys Targaryen. King Aenys Targaryen had a child called Aegon, who was called Aegon the Uncrowned. And Aegon the Uncrowned, he wasn't called Aegon the Second because he was never king. And there are stillborns and stuff who are named Aegon, but they die. So you only get a number. You only get called the second or the third when you become king. And yeah, I agree. Hobart saying that Aegon is the second, that is like saying he is the king, despite the fact that Rhaenyra is the named heir. So yeah, that's a little bit treasonous, I would think. But, maybe you can just say it like a joke, and that's sort of how politics works, You just say the thing that you want to happen until it comes true. If enough people believe something, if enough people say something, it becomes true, because, kingship is not a real physical thing. It's just the fact that everyone believes that they're the king, and, public opinion and the way that public opinion is expressed is one of the themes of Fire and Blood, I think. So, we'll see more of this. Thanks for the super chat from Robbie and Toolsy and KKRL, who says, you can see Viserys' missing fingers in the hungover scene when he's sipping from the gold cup. Yeah, do we want to have a look at Viserys' missing fingers? Yeah, you're right. There we go. He's got a couple of stumps there. I wonder if the rot will continue to progress. What is this tiny little cup that Viserys is drinking from? Is that coffee? What is it that he's drinking? I don't know. Maybe he's taken some shots. Hair of the dog. Thanks for the super chat from Henry, who says, Condal insists on calling Viserys the king of the Rhoynar. Maybe it's a Taiwan Chinese Taipei situation where they don't want to admit they're unconquered. Yeah, so at this time, Dorne is not part of the Seven Kingdoms. Dorne, which is where the Martells and Oberyn Martell and Pedro Pascal are from, they are their own thing. They are not ruled by the king on the Iron Throne. And yeah, so it is kind of weird that they say that they call King Viserys King of the Rhoynar in the first man, and the Rhoynar are an ethnic group who live in Dorne. So King Viserys is not really the king of the Rhoynar, but I guess, like I was just saying, like, you say something is true enough, and once enough people believe it, then it becomes the truth. So if you just say that, yeah, we are totally in charge of Dorne, that's kind of the first step in making it true sometimes. But yeah, Dorne remains unconquered and will remain unconquered for this whole show. It's only later on through marriage and diplomacy that Dorne gets brought into the realm. And the Rhoynar, by the way, are Nymeria's people. Princess Nymeria, who was talked about in Season 1, Episode 1, she was the leader of the Rhoynar people, and she led them on this big migration. And she is admired by Rhaenyra, and she's a symbol of female power, because in Dorne, the inheritance laws are different. Like, in most of Westeros, the eldest male inherits before the eldest female. But in Dorne, it's just the eldest child. So a woman can inherit a lordship in front of her brothers in Dorne. So that's obviously a very relevant idea in The Dance of the Dragons when Rhaenyra is trying to inherit. And that's relevant in Book 4, A Feast for Crows, in the main Game of Thrones series, because there's a character called Arianne Martell who crowns Myrcella Baratheon. And tries to make her the Queen of Westeros using Dornish inheritance law. Because, Myrcella is in Dorne, and Arianne says they should follow Dornish law, and tries to start a war with the Lannisters by crowning Myrcella. Anyway, thanks for the super chat from Nicholas, who says, I think Strong's move was to get Viserys to intervene in the Stepstones, lest Krabby Patty murk the Velaryon kid. Okay, yeah, that's an interesting thought. Because, yeah, like, I think Lionel was one of the people telling Viserys, hey, you should probably, like, send help. I mean, I think Alicent was the one who convinced Viserys to send reinforcements to the Daemon and Velaryons. But yeah, I mean, the fact that they... Oh, well, yeah, you made a good point. Yeah, we have to pray that Laenor Velaryon doesn't get killed in this war, Lionel said. Yeah, you're right. And yeah, obviously, Rhaenyra can't marry Laenor if Laenor gets eaten by crabs, can he? So, yeah, I guess that's part of why Viserys sent reinforcements, was that he might be taking this idea of marrying Rhaenyra to Laenor seriously. So that's why he sent them aid, perhaps. It's going to be funny when those reinforcements arrive at the Stepstones and find that, the war is already over. Or maybe it won't be. I mean, maybe the war will continue even without the crab feeder. We will have to find out. Thanks for the super chat from Liam, who says, why isn't the north of the realm talked about in House of the Dragon? It feels as if it doesn't exist in this show compared to Game of Thrones. The north always has been sort of its own thing. Like, unlike Dawn, the north is part of the realm. It is ruled by the king. But you'll notice that the north is very far away. This whole chunk here is the north. It's almost as big as the rest of Westeros combined. The north is huge. And there aren't many people in it, and it doesn't have much money, and it doesn't have much crops, it doesn't have many knights. Like, the north is mostly irrelevant to the south. Like, the south sort of does its own thing. They're all close to each other. They can communicate and travel around really quickly. Whereas, just like sending someone to go and visit the Starks takes weeks and weeks. So the north has always kind of been separate. And the reason why the Starks are relevant in the time of Game of Thrones is because they come south. It's because the Starks come down to King's Landing and travel all that way that they become relevant to the royal goings on. It's not like in the Game of Thrones show when people are just teleporting and jetpacking back and forth between the north and south. The north is very isolated in the books, so it kind of makes sense. I mean, it was funny that, what was it, Rickon Stark they called him in House of the Dragon episode 1. Like, he turned up to swear loyalty to Rhaenyra, and he looks quite grumpy, doesn't he? And you would be, because he just traveled like weeks and weeks just to come down and to kneel to Rhaenyra and then turn around and go home, right? You would be a bit peeved if you had to come all that way just to say, yep, I'll support you. Thanks for the super chat from Brian, who says, I don't like how they made Rhaenyra the protagonist instead of being grey like in the books. It seems weird to make the Alicent and Otto side more villainous. I kind of disagree because I feel like, like Rhaenyra, especially in this episode, yeah, I agree that she comes off as the protagonist. Like, we are meant to sympathize for her. But I think that both Alicent and Rhaenyra, have their good sides and their bad sides. Like, I think that Rhaenyra is a sympathetic protagonist in this episode, but, like, she also is kind of a dick. Like, she's not making it easy for anyone. And, she's not even making smart decisions, really. I mean, I feel like a large part of why Rhaenyra wants to be the heir to the throne is because most people don't want her to be the heir to the throne. Know what I mean? Like, Viserys says in this episode, if I told Rhaenyra that she's not allowed to marry Jason Lannister, she would want to marry Jason Lannister. Like, she's a teenager who just rebels and wants to go against whatever her parents are telling her, which is, the way some people are. I think that Rhaenyra is kind of being stubborn and annoying, realistic, and, I think it's perfectly good writing. But I don't think that Rhaenyra is, like, totally the good guy. And again, like, it's kind of scary when she stabs the shit out of that boar, like, she's covered in blood. And, I also think Rhaenyra is still working out if she really wants to be the heir or not, Like, I think that she has a lot of feelings and frustration about her sort of alienation and displacement, but I don't think that it's as simple as Rhaenyra is the good guy and Alicent is the bad guy. That's not the sense that I get. And Alicent tries to reconcile with Rhaenyra here. Like, she's saying it doesn't have to be like this. Let's be friends again. I think that Otto does come across as villainous, but I think Rhaenyra and Alicent are both pretty sympathetic. Thanks for the super chat from Alfred. I don't think Daemon will get grayscale because grayscale can be dormant and non-contagious, like Shireen. Thanks for the super chat from Sauce Boss. I agree. Jason Lannister's sassy finger snap was very cool. Thanks for the super chat from Brennan, who says that a shady, slightly drunk character named Alt Swift X said he lifted this out of your wallet and I wanted to return it. Thanks, Brennan. Also, give Paddy Considine all the awards. Yeah, I think Paddy Considine's performance as Viserys has been really good, because he is sort of just repeatedly fucking everything up, but we feel so sorry for him while he does it, I guess we can be less sympathetic the more drunk he's getting. Like, it sort of feels like he's just giving up on taking action sometimes. Like, he sees how many problems he has, but he just wants to eat his onions at the banquet instead. All this fucking politicking, he said. So, yeah, but it's a great performance. Thanks for the super chat from Chris, who says, that pug was a total Ed Sheeran moment for me. Yeah, what was more immersion breaking? The appearance of Ed Sheeran in Season 7, Episode 1, or the appearance of the pug in this episode? I feel like the pug was fine, because, like, in real, royal families, and in any family, sometimes people have pets. Sometimes people have cherished, cute little doggos. I think that's fine. I think that's real. I don't think it's ridiculous. I mean, it's like the bloody the British royal family and their little pets. I think it's perfectly fine to have a dog. Thanks for the super chat from Henrique, who says, who was the guy flying the small dragon at the end? So that was Laenor Velaryon. And Laenor is the son of Corlys Velaryon. We saw Laenor in episode 1. That's young Laenor. And Laenor has now grown up. He's grown up quite rapidly, but this is Laenor Velaryon, and his dragon is called Seasmoke, and Seasmoke is a young grey dragon, quite a pretty dragon, and it was Laenor and Seasmoke who came and saved Daemon in this battle. And yeah. Thanks for the super chat from Lizard, who says, shouldn't Daemon attacking under a flag of parley be as controversial as the phrase breaking guest rights? It goes against custom. Yes, I think it is very bad that Daemon used a peace flag and then killed everyone. Because, conventions of war are there to make wars less horrible than they might otherwise be. If you can't trust your enemy to surrender when they say they're surrendering, then, next time you're just going to slaughter them instead, right? Like, if you don't show mercy to people who surrender, then no one's ever going to surrender and wars are never going to end, So yeah, it is fucked up. I mean, maybe part of why Daemon might get away with this is that these guys are people from the Triarchy, and I think a lot of Westerosi people don't have a lot of respect for like Eastern people and their customs. It's a different culture. It's a different world. They don't exist in the same political, cultural structure. So maybe, they don't respect the free cities enough to feel the need to actually, obey their customs. But yeah, I mean, it definitely does tell us that Daemon is someone who is willing to break the rules. And we already knew that from when we saw Daemon on the throne in season 1, episode 1. And Harold Westerling said, 7 hells, what's he doing on the bloody throne? It tells us something about the character, and he's someone who breaks rules and is willing to cause a great deal of trouble. Thank you for the super chat from Ryan and from Cobalt, who says, do you think Daemon isn't getting enough credit among the fans as well as the characters? I mean, look, I think he has won some credit. He's won some glory for himself today. I think that people will be impressed with Daemon for single-handedly slaying the crab feeder and, potentially ending this war. Potentially. I think that people will continue to be annoyed by Daemon. I think that the Valarians might be very pleased with Daemon for his assistance. So maybe that alliance and that relationship will deepen. Credit. I mean, yeah, look, I still think Daemon's kind of a dickhead because he enjoys mutilating civilians, but we'll see how that progresses. Thanks for the super chat from Christian. Yes, the crab feeder did have grayscale. Thanks for the super chat from Rudy, who says, are they going to tell us more about the Song of Ice and Fire prophecy, or are they just mentioning it to tie in the story to Got? Yeah, I'm very curious to see whether they talk more about Aegon the Conqueror's prophecy about the White Walkers. I mean, it's interesting, like, we got talk this episode about Viserys' dream of having a son, and then he stopped believing in the dream, and that's why he named Rhaenyra as heir. But now that he has a son, he has baby Aegon, he sort of changed his mind again. And that's, that is very consistent with dreams in the main series. Because, like, Maester Aemon Targaryen, who we saw in the show, he's a Targaryen, and he had a relationship with Rhaegar Targaryen, who is the father of Jon Snow, at least in the TV show. Rhaegar Targaryen is this fella who hooked up with Lyanna Stark. And Rhaegar Targaryen had beliefs about prophecy. He believed that he was the prince that was promised, who would defeat the White Walkers. And then he changed his mind, and he thought that his son Aegon would be the one who would defeat the White Walkers. And then he changed his mind again, and he ran off with Lyanna Stark and had babies and had Jon Snow. And it seems as though Rhaegar thought that his son Jon would be the one who would save the world from the White Walkers. Aegon's dream in House of the Dragon is called the Song of Ice and Fire. And Jon Snow is symbolically of ice and fire because the icy Starks and the fiery Targaryens are his parents. So it seems as though in the books it might be Jon Snow who is like the prophesied one to save the world from the White Walkers. My point is that, Rhaegar's, he sort of loses his faith, he changes his mind, he has all these different interpretations of the prophecy. Aemon changes his mind in book 4, and he says, oh, you know what? I think Daenerys is the prince that was promised. And Melisandre thinks that Stannis is the prince that was promised. So there's all these different opinions and interpretations, and it goes along with the emotions of the individual, It's not all about magic and rules and ancient scrolls. It's about the feelings of the people. Like, Rhaegar believed in himself, but then he believed in someone else, and he fell in love. So it's all connected to relationships and feelings, and I think that they perfectly captured that with Viserys. Where, it was so much about Viserys' love for Aemma, and then he lost Aemma, and then he lost his faith. And then he started to believe in Rhaenyra, and he had a closer relationship with Rhaenyra. But then he hooked up with Alicent and had a baby, and that's sort of shaken his faith again. So I think that's really, it fits wonderfully with how dreams are portrayed in A Song of Ice and Fire. It's about your personal desires and dreams, because it's not about magic, it's not just fantasy. It's about real life, and real life is about having dreams and having desires, and sometimes you lose your dreams and sometimes you gain your dreams, and people change your perspective on your dreams, and it's that's why this is about real human drama, not just dragons and tits and dragons. Thanks for the super chat from Daniel, who says, how did Daemon fight with 2 arrows in his chest? Yeah, he seemed pretty chill about the arrows. Like, he sort of fell over and looked upset about the arrows for a little while. But then he pulled the arrows out and just continued running and fighting. So, yeah, like, come on. Like, did the arrows seriously hurt him or not? Did his armor stop the arrows or not? Not super clear. Thanks for the super chat from Sitali, who says, what is up with all the pornographic orgy tapestries in the castle? Love the channel. You're the best. Thank you, Sitlali. Yeah, there are a lot of those bloody tapestries, aren't there? We saw them in the scene with Alicent and Otto. I'm not sure if I can even... Yeah, well, I can't even show them because YouTube is so goddamn afraid of bodies. But there are these pictures of people having sex all over the walls of the Red Keep. And some of them are humans having sex with humans. Some of them have dragons having sex with humans, which connects to the whole blood of the dragon idea that the Targaryens are connected to the dragons. And, I think that symbolically it does make sense to me that there's all this sex imagery because, it sort of mirrors the blood imagery of the opening sequence with the bloodline, like, dripping through, because it's all about death and life and the interconnectedness of life and death. I mean, season 1, episode 1 had Emma dying in childbirth at the same time that the men were killing each other in the field. Like, this whole machine, this whole political wheel, it grinds over people, life and death, birth and death. And I think that having the sex scenes is part of that. It's sort of the other side of the death. And almost like the violence of the orgy as well. It's quite a passionate orgy that's going on in some of those scenes, and the violence of it, again, that interconnectedness. But I feel like it shouldn't be in the background of every goddamn scene. It feels like every second scene there's a orgy in the background, which just feels a little bit silly and distracting when it's that much. But I think thematically it makes sense. Thanks. And also, it's a horny story. Like, Fire and Blood is a very horny book, and this show will continue to be increasingly horny, so I guess it makes sense in that respect. Thank you for the super chat from Peyton, who says, Lionel Strong giving good advice to his king. Shame he hasn't been listening. Yeah, I mean, look, I think that Lionel probably is broadly right that siding with the Velaryons would be a good idea because the Velaryons have 2 dragons. Rhaenys rides Melis and Laenor rides Seasmoke, but Viserys just really wanted to hook up with the teenage Alicent because she gave him Warhammer figurines. Thanks for the super chat from Kat and from Shampoo Tester, who says, loved the comment that Jaehaerys' daughters drove him mad. Yeah, it's a great point. So, we had some dialogue about how Viserys has so much trouble with his daughter Rhaenyra, and King Jaehaerys had even more trouble with his daughters because he had about 5 of them or something, and Sarah Targaryen ran off and had joined a brothel just to spite him, and Alyssa was a tomboy, and Visera was a narcissistic borderline personality disorder nightmare. Jaehaerys had very bad relationships with some of his daughters. Some of them died, and Alysanne blamed Jaehaerys for the death of his daughter Daella, because Alysanne feels that Jaehaerys pushed her into getting married and having children too early, and Daella, as it turns out, became the mother of Aemma Arryn. Jaehaerys' daughter Daella died giving birth to Aemma, and then Aemma died giving birth to the baby Balon who died. So there is a long history of girls being chewed up and spat out by this royal family. And Viserys is not the first Targaryen king to have difficulty with his daughter. And I think part of it is that, the Targaryen girls are more fiery because the Targaryens have these fiery personalities, these rebellious, powerful personalities. And because Targaryens can be dragon riders, that means that these girls have weapons of war, I mean, part of how this patriarchy works is that the women can't wield swords. The women can't fight in battles, and therefore they have to rely on men. But Targaryens, who have dragons, they don't need to rely on men for protection or for war because they have a goddamn dragon. So, girls having dragons is like inherently a threat to the patriarchy. And I guess that sort of fits with Otto's personality because Otto, he calls Mazaria a whore and he, wants his daughter Alicent to go and hook up with the king. Like he wants to enforce this, very traditional gendered way of doing things. And so, in last episode, when Rhaenyra turned up on a dragon and like totally disempowered Otto and totally stripped Otto of his control of the situation, I think that shows how, someone like Otto, who wants this sort of gendered order to be in place, would hate these girls running around on dragons, running amok, disrupting that order. Thanks for the super chat from Toolsy, who says, Daemon and Rhaenyra both got physically covered in blood this episode, and Viserys couldn't even make an easy hunting kill. All Targs get their hands dirty, and Viserys continues to struggle with power. Yeah, I mean, I think it was a very deliberate contrast to see, Daemon and Rhaenyra getting out there and doing it, and, getting into violence and being competent, whereas Viserys spent almost this entire episode sitting on his bum, drinking wine, complaining, eating, and then coming to slaughter like one deer that was already tied up for him. But he fucked it up and he had to stab it twice. Which is, it's quite a lot like, remember Robb Stark executing Rickard Karstark in Season 3, Episode 5? Rickard Karstark is this lord of the Karstarks, and he was pissed off because some of his children were killed, and he wanted revenge on Jaime Lannister, but then Catelyn freed Jaime Lannister, and Rickard was pissed off. Rickard had this lovely big beard, and so Robb Stark decided to execute Rickard for going against his wishes. Which, arguably was the right thing to do, but killing Rickard sort of was a disaster because the Karstark army abandoned him and it created dissension, and it was sort of part of the downward spiral that led to Robb's death at the Red Wedding. And when Robb killed Rickard Karstark, I think I'm misremembering. No, yeah, I am misremembering. Robb killed Rickard, fine. What I am thinking of is Theon killing bloody Roderick Castle. That's what I'm thinking of. When Theon took over Winterfell in Season 2 and he executed Roderick Castle. And when Theon executed Roderick Castle, he did a really shit job of cutting off his head. He had to take multiple blows and he was hacking the guy's head off. He didn't do it in one clean blow. He had to take multiple blows. And I think that was a symbol of Theon's incompetence and ugliness and just the illegitimacy of him being in charge. If he can't even cut a guy's head off correctly, then how's he going to hold Winterfell? That was sort of the meaning there. And I think similarly, the fact that Viserys could not cleanly kill this deer shows how he's not capable of cleanly being in charge and cleanly dealing with the succession, So yeah, it's a very bad omen. And certainly the soundtrack and the whole vibe of that scene contributed to that feeling of, oh no, this is not good. Thanks for the donation from Ranark, who says, Jason Lannister hyping up Casterly Rock just makes me more disappointed in what we got. Yeah, I totally agree. I felt the same way because Jason Lannister, the Lord of Casterly Rock, the ancestor of Tywin and Jaime and Cersei and Tyrion, he was saying, my house, Casterly Rock, is so big and so cool. If you stand on the top of the rock, you can see across the sea. And here's some artwork of what Casterly Rock looks like in the books. It is massive. It is a giant mountain, and the Casterlys and the Lannisters, they live inside it. Well, not the Casterlys anymore, just the Lannisters live inside it. It's like this network of caves, this palace that they've made inside the rock. It's kind of funny that there appear to be battlements on the walls on the rock. I'm not sure what the bloody point of battlements are when it's 400 feet in the air. What is the point of those battlements? Are you going to fire arrows on your enemies from up here? Anyway, so Casterly Rock in the books is huge and impressive and awesome, whereas when we got to see Casterly Rock in the TV show, it was not quite so big and awesome. Here's what it looked like in Season 7, Episode 3. Daenerys and Grey Worm briefly took Casterly Rock in Season 7. Castle Rock is nowhere near as impressive in the show compared to how it looks in the books, huh? So yeah, I mean that's sort of the curse of this show, is that however good House of the Dragon is, it's still in the shadow of the original Game of Thrones show, which, you know, there were good things about the original show, especially the early seasons, but a lot of people hated the later seasons. And that's part of why I personally don't like the Aegon's Dream thing in Season 1, Episode 1, because it sort of... I don't want to be reminded of the underwhelming end to the White Walker plotline in Season 8, you know? But, you know, we'll see how it develops, and, you know, not everybody hated Season 8. Thank you for the super chat from Miles, who says, maybe the crabs eat at Crab Feeder's grayscale to keep it manageable. Now, there's a good theory. A little bit like the maggots eating Viserys's rotted finger. Yeah, maybe the crabs nibble on Crab Feeder's grayscale so that he doesn't die. I like that theory. Maybe the reason why Crab Feeder makes all these people getting eaten by crabs is just to, you know, give them a good skincare routine, you know, just to get rid of those blackheads and dry skin with some crabs. He's just trying to help them out. Thanks for the super chat from Stuart, who says, this show can really go on beyond the dance till up to and cover Robert's Rebellion. I do not expect this show to cover the 180 years between now and Robert's Rebellion. I don't think they need to cover all of it. I mean, look, theoretically they could cover all of Fire and Blood. There's a period in history after this conflict that they could cover, but I suspect that they're just going to focus it on the Dance of the Dragons itself. So I think just a few seasons. Thanks for the super chat from Lamar, who says, at the party, was Viserys Targaryen carrying the same dagger that was the one that killed the White Walkers? Yes, Viserys has been wearing this dagger all throughout the show. You can't... Yeah, there it is. It's the quote-unquote cat's paw dagger. So we first saw this in Game of Thrones Season 1, Episode 2, when this assassin was sent to kill Bran Stark, and Catelyn fought off the assassin, and it was killed by the direwolf Summer. And in the show, they never actually explained who sent this assassin and why. In the books, they say that Joffrey sent the assassin to kill Bran, which seems like it might have been a retcon. It's sort of a weird little mystery thing in the books. It's not a big deal. But this dagger was brought by Catelyn to Varys and Littlefinger said that it was his dagger that was taken by Tyrion. And so this is the reason why Catelyn arrested Tyrion, which sparked the entire war. And then after Ned fell, Littlefinger had the dagger. And in Season 7, Littlefinger gave the dagger to Bran, which is a really fucking dumb thing to do, because the knife is a symbol of Littlefinger's betrayals and crimes and lies. So probably a dumb idea to give that reminder of his evil to Bran, the guy who can see the future. But, you know, Season 7 never really made sense, did it? And then Bran gave the knife to Arya, maybe because Bran knew the future and knew that this was going to be the knife that would be used to kill the Night King and end the threat of the White Walkers. So the constant presence of this knife on Viserys, you know, it shows that Viserys is constantly aware of his responsibility to remember Aegon's dream so that the Targaryens can defeat the White Walkers. Which, you know, for us reminds us that, well, it wasn't the Targaryens who defeated the White Walkers. Like, yes, Daenerys and Jon Snow, who is also a Targaryen, at least in the show, they were instrumental in bringing together a coalition of forces to fight against the White Walkers. You know, without the Targaryens, maybe Arya never would have got the chance to kill the Night King. But, you know, it is sort of this weird dissonance that, like, Viserys has this knife and this prophecy about the Targaryens saving the world, but, like, we know that it's Arya. So, like, how are those dots going to connect? What are they going to tell us in this show that helps us understand what happened there? Because I think, you know, in the books, the ending with the White Walkers is going to be very, very different. We don't know exactly what's going to happen, but I suspect, based on a lot of the foreshadowing, that Jon Snow and Daenerys in the books are going to have a much bigger role in defeating the White Walkers. I think there's big possibilities for some kind of magical sacrifice, some kind of flaming sword called Lightbringer, some kind of real, like, weird, magic, intense stuff. Maybe Bran will have a psychic battle with the Heart of Winter. Maybe Euron will be involved. There is some, like, real crazy, dark, high fantasy shenanigans happening in the books. But my point is that it's weird, because this show, House of the Dragon, is sticking very close to the books in a lot of ways, whereas the Game of Thrones show did not stick close to the books at all in the later seasons, mostly because there weren't books to stick to in the later seasons, to be fair. So, look, the knife is a very weird thing. Like, it feels to me like a very awkward mishmash of show canon with this knife, because that knife is not significant in the books. Like, there is no, like, super... I mean, you know, in the books at the moment, Littlefinger has that Valyrian steel knife, and I think that it is pretty likely that Sansa will kill Littlefinger with it, sort of similar to Season 7. But, like, the knife thing is very much a show thing, like the cosmic significance of the knife. So, I don't know where it's going. I don't know what they're going to do with this knife in this show. Well, I've got some ideas. But yeah, look, we'll wait and see. It's an open question what it's all going to mean with the prophecy and the knife. George says, why did Aemon beat the messenger? Yeah, so Daemon was with the Velaryons waging this war against the Triarchy, and then Viserys sent a letter saying, hey, Daemon, I'm going to send you some reinforcements to help you win this war. And Daemon, when he found out about the reinforcements, started beating the shit out of the messenger. Bit of a weird thing to do, huh? And my interpretation is that Daemon is angry because he doesn't want Viserys' help to win this war. He's fighting this war because he's a second son. He wants to win glory for himself. He wants to be the one to do it. Just like a little brother. When a little brother refuses their big brother's help because they want to do it for themselves. They want to show their strength and their independence. And I think that's what Daemon's doing. This is also sort of borrowed from the books, because in the books, we're told that when Daemon found out that Viserys was marrying Alicent Hightower, I think, Viserys got really angry and beat the messenger within an inch of his life. Inch of his life. Is that the phrase that's used? Yeah. So, quote, in the book, in the Vale... Prince Daemon reportedly whipped the serving man who brought the news to him within an inch of his life when he found out that Viserys was marrying Alicent. And the reason why Daemon was angry about that is because if, you know, Viserys has kids with Alicent, that pushes Viserys further down the line of succession. So now in the show, Alicent has baby Aegon, and baby Aegon is ahead of Daemon in the line of succession. And they both supposedly are behind Rhaenyra, the heir. But my point is that, you know, Daemon attacking a messenger is something that's borrowed from the books. And in the books, Daemon actually did go to the Vale. Because remember in Season 1, Episode 1, at the end of House of the Dragon, Episode 1, Viserys told Daemon to go to the Vale, because Daemon has a wife in the Vale called Rhea Royce. And in the book, Daemon actually did go to the Vale for a while. But in this case, they just cut that. And sent him right to the Stepstones after Dragonstone. Thanks for the super chat from Kate Linton, who says, which one of the Velaryon children are dragon riders and how? The dragon rider is Laenor Velaryon, who is the son of Rhaenys Targaryen and Corlys Velaryon. And Laenor is a dragon rider because his mother is a Targaryen. So Laenor has that blood of the dragon that has the magical capability of riding dragons. His sister Laena Velaryon also has the blood of the dragon from Rhaenys Targaryen, so maybe Laena will also be able to become a dragon rider, potentially. Thanks for the super chat from Playful Cloud, who says, is there anything to read into with Daemon and Rhaenyra both openly going against Viserys and getting covered in blood? I mean, it certainly suggests that there is a similarity between them, doesn't it? You know, Daemon runs off and engages in violence and has adventure because he feels angry and rejected by Viserys, And in this episode, Rhaenyra does exactly the same thing. Rhaenyra feels angry and rejected by Viserys, so she goes off and has a camping trip with Kristen Cole and, kills a pig. And so yeah, like, I think we can see the deep similarities between Rhaenyra and her uncle. Rhaenyra is almost more similar to Daemon than she is to Viserys, which of course is not necessarily a good thing, because Daemon is such a violent, shit-stirring, unstable individual. So, what kind of a politician will Rhaenyra be? Thanks for the super chat from Ado, who says, was it just me, or was Alicent's belly extra large? Yes, Alicent has an XL belly because she is pregnant, I think. Alicent is going to have a second child by the looks of it. I wonder who Alicent's second child will be. I mean, that's assuming if she survives the childbirth. We know how dangerous childbirth is in this world. Will Alicent survive? But yeah, I think Alicent is clearly pregnant here. It's pretty nice that Alicent has all this staff, all these midwives and wet nurses to look after the baby for her. That's pretty good. That'd be good. Thank you for the super chat from Kaiser, who says, any thoughts on Lionel, since he wants a marriage between the Targaryens and Velaryons, but didn't support naming Corlys's wife as heir? Yeah, well, I think that Lionel's logic is that he doesn't want to support women inheriting the throne, but he does support Velaryons. And, I think that the basic idea that the Velaryons are important and powerful, and they have dragons, and, they have a rival sort of line to the throne with Rhaenys and her children. Like, they are potentially people who might want to take the throne. So, marrying the Velaryons does make a lot of sense. I guess an interesting question is that, if Lionel is supporting Viserys marrying Laena, that would sort of displace Laenor. Because, in the logic of males inheriting first, Laenor would inherit the throne ahead of Laena if, say, Rhaenys was queen or whatever. So if Viserys married Laena and had kids, then their kids would become children, but maybe Laenor would arguably have a claim, So that's sort of the complication of this inheritance stuff. Like, there isn't always a super clear answer to who is the heir. And I think that if Viserys did marry Laena, Laenor might be a sort of a loose end there, Because every time you create a marriage to try and seal a breach, if you have kids, those kids might compete with the claims of other kids, Thanks for the super chat from SpongeBob, who says, the Velaryon Dragon Rider was cringe. Daemon should have killed everyone in the first scene. We don't need a battle in the third episode. We don't even know or care about the characters. I guess they could have done more to introduce Laenor before he did the thing. Like, we did not get much dialogue from the Velaryons. Like, we just had this scene where they were arguing and they were in a bad situation. Corlys and his brother Vaemond and his son Laenor, and they're in a difficult spot, and so Daemon was the one to go on the suicide run and do this crazy thing to defeat them. So yeah, we didn't get a whole lot from this war, did we? I mean, I think it makes perfect sense for Laenor to participate in the battle. He's got a dragon. He's got one of the only dragons in the world. I think it makes perfect sense for him to be involved. And, Caraxes, we got plenty of Caraxes action at the start, so I think that's fine. Thanks for the super chat from Alternate History Hub, who says, any thoughts on Daemon winning in open combat despite losing the war for 3 years? Yeah, like, what was he doing for the last 3 years? I mean, we get the sense that basically it was slow and ugly. I mean, it sounded like a bit of a stalemate, They were saying that the Triarchy have just been hiding from the caves so that they don't get roasted. So that's why the war has been so slow, and these guys seem sort of stuck on this island. They're talking about running out of food and running out of provisions. So it seems as though it's like dragged on for a while. So yeah, it required drastic action to try and change the status quo, and Daemon was the guy to do it. Thanks for the super chat from Kalen and from Jake. George R. R. Martin complained the Making the Eight scene prior to Bobby B's death was his least favorite because a king's hunting party should be grand. Do you think he specifically requested the scene this episode? Yeah, well, I mean, George Martin has reportedly, he was the co-creator of this show. He, worked out the overall story with Ryan Condal. And George requested a few specific things, including brighter heraldry, more distinct dragons, and also the inclusion of Jaehaerys II the Game of Thrones TV show just like removed one of the kings from the Targaryen lineage. The father of the Mad King Aerys is Jaehaerys II in the books, but in the show they just cut out Jaehaerys and made Aegon V, the father of Aerys instead, which sort of fucks with the story a bit. So yeah, it would not surprise me if George specifically requested, hey, like let's actually have a big proper royal hunt instead of 4 dudes walking through the forest. But again, like that was due to budgetary issues, I think. Thanks for the super chat from the Pope, who wants a pug theory video. Thanks for the donation from Luke, who says, what do you think about the white stag showing itself to Rhaenyra? I think that it might be what convinces Rhaenyra that, like, hey, maybe I should be on the throne. Because, you know, the white stag is the symbol of royalty. It's this almost like supernatural portent showing that, you know, I've been like chosen by God to be the heir, and you can see that she's really impressed. I mean, it sort of is a little reminiscent almost of, you know, Daenerys in Game of Thrones when her dragons get hatched and everyone's like, holy shit, like she's got dragons, she's legit, she's real, she should be in charge. Like people take a lot of like serious consideration to these signs and portents. That's why this royal hunt was going after the white hart in the first place. Because if they got the white hart on the birthday of Aegon Targaryen, the baby, then that might convince people that, hey, maybe the gods want Aegon Targaryen to be the king. And the fact that they did not find the white hart, they just found a normal deer, that suggests that maybe Aegon shouldn't be the heir and maybe Rhaenyra should be. So I guess one of the open questions is like, you know, is Rhaenyra a dreamer? In the way that Viserys is. Like, Viserys is clearly very influenced by dreams and signs and portents, and I guess, you know, will Rhaenyra be similarly influenced by them? What will Rhaenyra's relationship be with dreams and prophecy? Will she be more like Viserys, or will she not care about it? Thanks for the super chat from Papaya, who says, is the implication here that Laenor just claimed sea smoke during this war out of necessity? Yeah, so in the books, Laenor had his dragon Sea Smoke even back at the Council of Harrenhal. When Laenor was very young, he had his dragon Sea Smoke. It was just a hatchling at the time of the Harrenhal Council, but then he later became a dragon rider. In the show, they haven't told us. I guess it's possible that in the show, it's like in the books, Laenor always had Sea Smoke, perhaps. We don't know. They don't specify it. But hopefully we'll learn more about Laenor and Sea Smoke and their history and their relationship soon. I'm also very keen to see the Red Queen, Meleys, the dragon of Rhaenys Targaryen. I don't see why Rhaenys and Meleys didn't participate in this war. I mean, Rhaenys' husband, Corlys, was like in a very dangerous situation this episode. Like Corlys was saying, oh, I'm a little bit worried that we're going to be eaten by crabs. Why doesn't Corlys's wife Rhaenys come and help her husband with her giant fire-breathing dragon? Like, these things are massive weapons of war. And Rhaenys is like a pretty like badass woman who is willing to get involved in fisticuffs if she needs to. So I mean, it would make sense if Rhaenys participated in this war, but alas, we did not see her. Thanks for the super chat from Cloud, who says the liquid in the OP could represent blood, wax, and or wine to tie all the show's themes together. Yeah, that's a good point. So like the blood in the opening sequence, you know, it's the bloodline, it's life and death, it's family. And, you know, we also make the comparison to wine, the red wine, which we saw a lot of from Viserys as well this episode. And you're right, like wax, like the sealing wax that they put on the letters that they send with the ravens in Game of Thrones. That sealing wax is really important. We saw Otto sending a letter in the previous episodes, and, you know, there's like the pink letter, and there's all sorts of, you know, who wrote this letter and what does this letter mean. Aegon received a very significant letter that caused him to stop fighting a war in Dawn. So yeah, I agree. Like sealing wax in letters is also a very relevant symbol. Thanks for the super chat from Kaylin. Yeah, lots of weird, sexy murals on the walls. Thanks for the super chat from Merciful, who says Paddy Considine's acting continues to stun me. Yeah, well, it stunned George R. R. Martin as well. George Martin said that the Viserys in House of the Dragon has a tragic majesty that Viserys in the books never had. So yeah, George Martin agrees with you. And yeah, I agree. Like he loves his kids. He wants everyone to get along, and as a result, he's sort of failing to make hard decisions when he needs to. His downfall is that he's a good guy. You need to be a bit more of a dickhead. You need to be a bit more ruthless to be a good king, it seems. Thanks for the super chat from Tom, who says, I loved the juxtaposition of the extravagance of the camp and Viserys not doing anything to Rhaenyra roughing it and coming back with a true kill. Yeah, well, Rhaenyra and Daemon, unlike Viserys, are willing to piss people off, are willing to do the hard thing, and are willing to do some violence if they need to. So maybe Rhaenyra and Daemon will be much more, capable of getting shit done as politicians. But there may also be downsides to being divisive and violent. Thanks for the super chat from Eternal and Sam, who says, the grayscale will be more than benign. They made the choice to show it on his raw skin. Well, they did emphasize that Daemon was covered in the diseased man's plague blood, so maybe that will lead somewhere. I mean, like, there's a character called John Connington in the books who has grayscale, and John Connington's grayscale leads him to be more YOLO. It leads him to take more risks. It leads him to, be more chaotic and to do some extreme stuff. So if Daemon got grayscale from the crab feeder, maybe Daemon would become even more chaotic, even more fearless, even more suicidal. Because if the grayscale is going to kill you anyway, you might as well go full YOLO. Thanks for the super chat from Glidus. Glidus just released his video about House of the Dragon Episode 2. You all should subscribe to Glidus. Glidus has some discussion videos with a notorious shitposter called Alt-Shift-X that you might like to listen to, so check out Glidus' channel. Glidus says, what do you think the deer wanted from Rhaenyra? Did she perhaps have some crackers in her pocket? I don't know what deer eat. Yeah, I don't know. I think that she probably should have attacked the deer to weaken it so that she could get it inside a Pokeball. Is one strategy she could have taken. Because, I mean, that white deer is a shiny Pokemon, right? Like, you don't find those things easy. It's a very rare Pokemon. So, if she had a dragon and a white deer, she would be the terror of the realm. Thanks for the super chat from Bexon and from Eugenio, who says, Bloodraven chose Daeron over Daemon, the brother he loved, because of the currently show A Song of Ice and Fire dream of Aegon. Okay, that's a confusingly worded statement, but the answer is yes. So this whole Targaryen prophecy stuff goes way back, and I mean, I've said that I dislike Aegon's dream being in House of the Dragon, and I don't dislike it for like going against the book canon, because I think it is very plausible that in the books Aegon did have that dream. I mean, George Martin says so it is true, it is canon. Well, I only dislike it being in the show because I think that it makes it too clear. I like it when the prophecy is more mysterious, because in the books it is very unclear. What did Bloodraven believe about prophecy? What did Rhaegar believe about prophecy? And I think that ambiguity is a lot of what makes it interesting. But you're asking about Bloodraven and Daeron and Daemon. So Bloodraven, who is the three-eyed raven in the show, the guy who teaches Bran magic, this guy is Bloodraven. And in the books, he has a very long history as a politician. Bloodraven was Hand of the King. He basically ruled the realm in the time of Dunk and Egg. And Bloodraven was very insistent, you could say, on keeping the Blackfyres off the throne. Bloodraven supported one claim over another, and he opposed Daemon Blackfyre in favor of Daeron Targaryen. And a lot of people speculate, and I think it is probably true, that part of why Bloodraven supported a particular Targaryen bloodline was because he believed that Targaryen bloodline was the bloodline of the prince that was promised. It was the bloodline that would defeat the White Walkers. There's all sorts of stuff about, like, Bloodraven was hand for Aerys the First Targaryen, and Aerys did not have children. And I wonder if maybe the reason why Aerys did not have children is because they believed that his bloodline was not the bloodline of the prince that was promised. It was Mykar's bloodline and Aegon Egg's bloodline. So, like, there is a sense that, like, Bloodraven and Rhaegar and Aemon and Aerys the First had this belief that there was a particular bloodline. Like, Jaehaerys II made Aerys the Mad King marry his sister Rhaella because a witch told him that the prince that was promised would be born of that line. So, like, we are told explicitly that a particular bloodline is believed to be the one that will save the world from the White Walkers. And I agree, I agree, Eugenio, that that may have been what was motivating Bloodraven in the sides that he took politically in the Blackfire Rebellion. But it also is personal. It always is personal as well as magical. Because Bloodraven had a relationship with Daemon Blackfire as his rival and his enemy, and they were fighting over Shiera Seastar, who was their half-sister who they wanted to bang. So there's love and lust and resentment and human feelings as well as prophecy and magic, just like in House of the Dragon right now. But yeah, I certainly agree. I mean, I think the interesting question about this whole Aegon's prophecy thing is, you know, Rhaenyra knows about the prophecy now, but who will Rhaenyra pass the prophecy on to? You know, who remembers afterwards, because it's generation after generation. And there's this idea that Rhaegar rediscovered the prophecy in his papers. You know, maybe Bloodraven even told people in dreams about the prophecy. Like, the information is lost and refound and reinterpreted over and over. So it'll be interesting to see how this information is passed on, how it's reinterpreted. Maybe the dream will mean something different to Rhaenyra to what it means to Viserys and Aegon. Thanks for the super chat from Mephistopheles, who says, thoughts on Miguel Sapochnik departing the series. So Miguel Sapochnik is the co-showrunner of the show currently, and it's been reported that he's now going to leave the show after season 1. And there's another veteran Game of Thrones director who's going to come in to replace him, while Ryan Condal is going to continue to be the sort of main writer guy, while Miguel was the main sort of director guy. And you know, I'm not worried. Like, it sounded like Miguel was sort of dragged kicking and screaming back to Game of Thrones anyway. I mean, the dude put up with, like, what was it, like 3 consecutive weeks of nighttime filming in fucking Iceland or somewhere. Like, he has put up with some physically intense shoots, and being in charge of such a huge, stressful, multi-million-dollar operation, I think would be incredibly taxing. I think I'm pretty sure he had fewer grey hairs when he joined on to Game of Thrones. So yeah, I do not blame Miguel for wanting to be done with it. And yeah, I don't know, like, hopefully his replacement will be as good. Maybe his replacement will be better. I don't know. I don't speculate on, you know, real life people. We'll see what happens. Thanks for the super chat from Eek, who says, didn't Rhaenyra say that she doesn't like the sound of pigs dying since it reminds her of a crying child, but later she repeatedly stabs a boar after wondering about her succession? I agree, Eek. I think that, you know, Rhaenyra said that squealing boars are like squealing children, so it might be that Rhaenyra was thinking about that screaming child, Aegon, her political rival, when she was stabbing the crap out of that bacon boy, the boar. She let out all her anger on the boar, and I think that represents her anger towards the baby Aegon. So, yeah, that, And then earlier, Otto suggested, hey, we should marry Rhaenyra to Aegon. So what do you think Rhaenyra would think of that idea? Or maybe they'll grow up and be great friends. Remains to be seen. Thanks for the super chat from Guillaume, who says, what do you think about the Looney Tune-like bull that was that guy disappearing after being torched by the worm? Yeah, it was almost like a slapstick moment when that Valerion knight got stomped by Caraxes. It was a little bit silly and comedic, but I mean, I think it also told us something about the characters. Like, Daemon doesn't really give a crap about the Triarchy or the Valerions, really. He's just in it to prove himself, win glory, burn some dudes, you know, behead a crab. This kills the crab. I think it was purposeful, that stomp. Thanks for the super chat from Ryan, who says, women have been on the throne before. Laenor wasn't dragon riding during that fight. The amount of dragon legs, just a few of the inconsistencies. I'm not sure the show is staying that close to the book. When they say that a woman hasn't sat the throne before, they're not saying there has never been a female bomb on this particular seat. That's not what they mean. What they mean is that there has never been a woman who was the ruler of the Seven Kingdoms before, formally. And that's true. Like, there never has been. Like, yes, Visenya and Rhaenys sat in on the throne for Aegon, and they issued pronouncements on his behalf in the same way that a Hand of the King does, like Ned sitting on the throne. And there has been a regent, Alyssa Velaryon, who had power alongside Rhaegar Baratheon, but it's true that there has never been a female ruler ruling in her own right, in her own name, as her own ruler before. That is true. Ryan says that Laenor wasn't dragon riding in that scene. He was. We saw Laenor go and woohoo after he was burning everyone on his dragon sea smoke. Yeah, there he is. He said Dracarys and everything. So yeah, he was there. Thanks for the super chat from Rambo, who says, could him losing a second finger be a sign that he doesn't learn from his mistakes? Yeah, maybe if he cut off that finger, it would have stopped rotting. Thanks for the super chat from Johnny, who says, I feel like by making both Rhaenyra and Daemon so badass, no one on the audience is going to support the Greens. I mean, Daemon is badass, but, like, he's not a good guy. Like, he just beat the shit out of this messenger for giving him bad news. He tried to kill the messenger. I agree that Daemon and Rhaenyra are badass, but I think that he's still a dick. But, there are going to be many more developments and new characters ahead. So I would not be issuing pronouncements too soon on who the good guys are. There are going to be plenty more developments. And, one of the things that George and Ryan have talked about is that this story, they are aiming to make it ambiguous who the good guys are. Like, there is no clear heroes versus villains, black versus white here. It's a little bit more complicated than that. Thanks for the super chat from Jim, who says, Viserys serving himself from the buffet, pouring his own wine, having no one to talk to while being a drunk sad boy, and having the stag captured for him. Is he realizing how unking-like he is? I think everyone is realizing how unking-like he is, and that's why they're so eager to figure out who the heir is, I think that one of the things about Viserys pouring his own wine like that is that it emphasizes that Viserys does not have a cupbearer. His cupbearer used to be his daughter Rhaenyra. She was the royal cupbearer, but she's off reading books instead of being his cupbearer. So that shows how Rhaenyra has left her role and has abandoned Viserys, it feels like. Or maybe, Rhaenyra was removed as cupbearer. Maybe Otto said that, we shouldn't have Rhaenyra be the cupbearer because of XYZ. We should totally have my cousin, Hubert Hightower instead. But yeah, I think that Viserys pouring his own wine emphasizes Rhaenyra's absence. Thanks for the super chat from Ryan, who says, I don't normally disagree with general consensus nor your opinion, but I've been so underwhelmed. I even found Lord of the Rings more entertaining. That crab feeder plot line felt like filler, fell flat on a crab-fed face. It is. People who were expecting like some long drawn out dramatic war with crab feeder will be disappointed. And that's kind of part of the point, is that this whole war is like a dumb diversion that Daemon joins in on for shits and giggles. And that's something that the book talks about. Like in the book, and maybe we're going to get that later, but in the book, like Viserys says that, I'm glad that Daemon is off fighting this war because it keeps him out of trouble. It's like this like funny irony that he's like, yeah, it's a good thing that he's fighting a war because fighting a random war is like one of the less annoying things that Daemon could be doing right now. It keeps him out of trouble. And Viserys like funds the war and supports the war basically because he's glad that, Daemon is not causing trouble in his own house. So, yeah, it's meant to be a diversion. And, like pointless, horrible violence is one of the themes of this story. So, you know, if you're expecting everything to be super rewarding and pay off and feel glorious, then you may be disappointed. Although I guess that's part of why they added the prophecy, you know? Like, part of why they mentioned Dagon's prophecy is to say, oh, there is a meaning behind all this violence. There is actually a higher purpose behind all of this. So maybe that's why they did that. Thanks for the super chat from Heather and from Joshua, who says, awesome episode. The creative team had a heavy task, and they did it. Thanks for your amazing work. Thank you, Joshua. Glad you appreciate. Very kind donation. Thank you. Thanks for the donation from Judd, who says, are all Lannisters in history bad? Has there ever been a good Lannister? Yeah, that's a good question. I think most of the Lannisters are dicks. I mean, Tytos Lannister, the father of Tywin, was not a terrible guy. I mean, I guess he, like, sort of undermined his house by, you know, hooking up with his mistress, and he was not a very good dad. But Tytos, the father of Tywin, was not horrible, I guess. But yeah, Tywin is a mass murderer who orders his son's girlfriend to be raped, and Jaime defenestrates a child, and Cersei kills and tortures, and Tyrion is pretty evil in the later books. So, yeah, Lannisters do tend to be dickheads, and maybe that's what too much money does to you. I mean, the Lannisters, we saw Tytos in this episode. He was so arrogant and just not a nice dude. So much, I think, because of his wealth and his arrogance. So maybe they need to be taken down a peg or two, and maybe that's the point of Tyrion's arc. Maybe Tyrion in the books will ultimately become a better person through his experiences. I mean, I guess that's kind of what they did with Tyrion in the Game of Thrones show. I think that Tyrion became a very boring character in the Game of Thrones show later seasons, but I think that what they were sort of going for was that his experiences and, it, you know, like believing in Daenerys, it sort of humbled him and it sort of mellowed him out, and it made him more willing to sort of try and make peace and try and make compromise, though that did fail catastrophically. Mad Duck Machine says that Jason Lannister was played by the same actor from the original Game of Thrones show, Hugh of the Vale, who died in the big tournament. Yes, that is true. In Season 1, Episode 4, we met Sir Hugh of the Vale. He went on a joust and he got killed by the mountain. And then Ned Stark and Barristan had a conversation over his corpse. So yeah, it's fun that we get to see Sir Hugh return as Tywin Lannister and Jason Lannister. He's playing both of the twins at the same time, which is quite funny. Jason is the one with the longer hair, and Tywin is the one with the shorter hair, so that you can tell them apart. Thanks for the super chat from Peter, who says, if only Rhaenyra killed the White Hart and brought it back to camp. That's a great point, Peter. If Rhaenyra, like it was quite a badass scene when, like, Rhaenyra, you know, walked back into town with this dead boar as a sort of a trophy, which did sort of impress everybody and turn some heads, which was cool. But yeah, I mean, if she had brought back the White Hart, yeah, I agree with you. She might have actually convinced some people that she should be the heir to the throne. But, you know, I still think she impressed some people with her boar as well. Everyone gets pulled pork for dinner, Ryan said in the Inside the Episode. By the way, I think this guy is Harwin Strong. That's Laris Strong, the clubfoot. And I think that is Harwin Strong, nicknamed Breakbones, who is the eldest son of Lionel Strong, and Harwin is the heir to Harrenhal and said to be the strongest man in the realm. I would like it if Harwin looked stronger. Like, does this guy look like the strongest guy on the continent to you guys? He doesn't look especially strong, like, no offense, but, I mean, they could have got someone super bulked up or something. Maybe he should have worn, like, a muscle suit under his costume. Thanks for the super chat from Erica, who says, do you think there is a connection between the Dragon Keeper's costume and Shepard's? Yeah, I think that's a good point, Erica, because, yeah, the Dragon Keepers have these sort of long sticks that they use to sort of direct the dragons. And they do look like a shepherd's stick, doesn't it? And the Valyrians did have this history as being shepherds originally. Here they are. The ancient Valyrians, like the precursors to the Valyrians, were said to be shepherds. And so you can see they've got the little sticks, which look quite similar to the Dragon Keeper sticks. So yeah, I agree. That might be a deliberate connection, shepherds of dragons. Of course, with the Valyrians, there are some deep lore conspiracy theories that, they may not have actually been the first dragon riders, because there are some artifacts around the world that seem to have been built by dragon riders, like the Five Forts and like the foundation of the High Tower, that seem to predate the Valyrians. So it seems as though there were a people before the Valyrians that had dragons, and maybe they were the Great Empire of the Dawn, maybe they were from a Shai, maybe all sorts of stuff going on. Maybe the Great Empire of the Dawn created the Valyrians with blood magic. All sorts of stuff. Thanks for the super chat from Ashley, who says, the white stag appeared to Rhaenyra, but she didn't kill it, whereas Daemon had to do it through killing. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, like, Rhaenyra did have this violent moment when she stabbed the boar to death very violently and passionately, but she spared the deer, the white hart. So I guess in this episode, it's showing us an example of Rhaenyra being violent and emotional, and also an example of Rhaenyra being restrained and peaceful. So I guess that leaves it, it shows us that she can do both. She has both peacefulness and violence inside her, whereas Daemon chooses violence. I think Daemon has never seen a problem that he did not want to solve with his sword. And so yeah, that's an important difference between them, I suppose. Thanks for the donation from Gideon, who said, why did Daemon get so mad about the Raven? Because Daemon did not want to... Daemon wanted to win the war himself. He did not want his big brother to win the war for him. He did not want Viserys' reinforcements. He wanted to do it himself. And that, it shows how just emotional Daemon is. He wants... he has these very particular insecurities about, not being enough and not inheriting the power and not being validated and not getting attention. And that's why he does the things he does. And there's also a political angle to it, because in this world, you have to, if you want power, you have to show how cool and powerful you are. You need feats to demonstrate your strength and your wealth and your power. And so, Daemon is advancing himself politically by showing that he's powerful. Thanks for the super chat from Clausiest, who says, so the crab feeder had grayscale, yeah? People keep asking this. Yes, the crab feeder had grayscale, but it may have been the non-contagious version of grayscale, like what Shireen had. So it's possible that Daemon won't catch it. Thanks for the super chat from Silverscale, who says, Viserys doesn't mean for Rhaenyra to be heir. If he meant it, she'd sit on some councils, not be a show pony. Yeah, I agree. I think that Viserys obviously should try to include Rhaenyra more. I think that Viserys does want Rhaenyra to be heir. That's why he told her about the dream, and that's why he had that giant ceremony telling everyone that she was the heir. But I think that, Viserys does have doubts. He does think that maybe his baby Aegon should be the heir instead, because he did have a dream about his son being the heir to the throne. So I think that Viserys is sort of in two minds about it. But I think he is serious about Rhaenyra, or at least he was serious about it. I wonder if, maybe Viserys has invited Rhaenyra to be a part of the politics, but she has refused, because she's grumpy, or maybe Otto has pushed Rhaenyra away. I guess there's a lot of questions about what that dynamic has been in the last few years. Because, Rhaenyra really should be a part of the politics more. In the books, they say that she was part of the politics more, but it's a difficult dynamic. Thanks for the super chat from Keno, who says, I'm pretty sure Jason is Jaime's grandfather. No. Jaime's grandfather is Tytos Lannister. There's quite a few more Lannisters in between the current generation and Game of Thrones. Thanks for the super chat from Vesper, who says, speaking of eggs, do you think the size of the eggs on the show makes sense, given the size of the dragons? I mean, they're the same size as an ostrich egg. I mean, we've seen what the little hatchlings look like. We've seen Drogon and Rhaegal and Viserion when they were little baby dragons. And, I think, they got all the wings and stuff. They're fairly large. I think they look the right size for the dragon eggs. But one of the things I always found funny about the dragon eggs in Game of Thrones is that they have scales, which seems silly to me. I think that the books do describe them as having scales, and the books also describe the dragon eggs as being colorful. So like the color of the egg seems to correspond with the color of the dragon inside, which is kind of cool. And I also liked how in the previous episode they mentioned that Rhaenyra chose and selected the dragon egg that was given to the baby Balon. So there's sort of a tradition about who gets to choose, and the color and the sort of symbolism. It's all there, and it's going to be more important as the story goes on, because there are going to be more dragons and more dragon eggs. Thanks for the super chat from Game, who said, had Aegon and Rhaenyra married? Well, maybe they will. Thanks for the super chat from Hamptons, who says, are there any other Targaryens in Westeros? Why would anyone follow them if only 3 family members were left? Yeah, so they are in sort of a vulnerable position right now because there aren't many Targaryens around. Because, Aemon died, Balon died, Alyssa died. I mean, there are some Targaryen bastards running around, like the bastards of Sarah Targaryen in the east. But yeah, there are not a lot of Targaryens left, and that does make them vulnerable, and that's why Viserys married Alicent to make more Targaryens, and that's why they're talking about marrying Rhaenyra to make more Targaryens. I mean, it is this delicate thing where you want to have enough Targaryens so that you don't die out, but you don't want so many Targaryens that you have lots of competing claims, because if you have lots of Targaryens, they're probably all going to want the throne and they're going to fight each other. So it's a very delicate balance of having enough Targaryens. And at the same time, they're usually trying to only marry within the family to try and keep the dragon blood to themselves. And, Targaryens sometimes have issues with, like, weird stillbirths and some sort of reproductive issues with the Targaryens sometimes. So it's a delicate thing trying to have enough Targaryens, but not too many. Thanks for the donation from Ethan, who says, jumped in, love the content, curious about your thoughts on the Hightower motives. Also, the greasy black stone at the base of the Hightower, and whether they have Valyrian ancestry. Yeah, it's an interesting question. So, I mean, Otto's motivation, Otto and Hobart Hightower, they want Alicent they want Alicent's children to be on the throne. They want Otto to be the grandparent of the king. So that will make the Hightowers more powerful. That will give them a legacy. That's what they want. But you bring up the Hightower Foundation because, as I mentioned, there is some evidence that the Valyrians were not the first dragon riders. And one of the pieces of evidence is that the Hightower in Old Town, which is the city of the Hightowers, the Hightower is built on this black stone foundation. And this stone, it's in the form of like a fortress. It's like this old building. It's a very ancient building. And the way that this foundation is made is with dragon fire, because there's this particular way of using dragonfire to melt and fuse stone so that you have these smooth stone shapes without any joins and without any mortar. It's all just fused together, so it's super strong. And the interesting thing about this black stone Hightower foundation is that it appears to be fused stone made with dragonfire, but the architecture is very distinctly not Valyrian. It seems as though a different culture made this, which is very weird because it raises the question of like, well, okay, what culture had dragons years before the Targaryens? Like, who were these guys? And one theory in the books is that it was made by the goddamn squishers. There are these Lovecraftian fish monsters that George just took from H.P. Lovecraft. And some people believe that the squishers these guys were responsible for building the black stone. There's also like Ashai is made out of black stone. There's a place called Yeen with like a toad idol made out of black stone. So there is evidence that like maybe Lovecraftian fish monsters built the foundation of the Hightower. Also, this is located on a place called Battle Isle, and there's this mystery of like what was the battle that happened here. And one of the theories is that the previous Long Night, the previous battle against the White Walkers, may have been fought on Battle Isle, which is kind of terrifying because it's at like the southernmost point in Westeros. And so, yeah, there are all sorts of theories. It seems as though there was a dragon rider presence in Westeros in like Old Town long before Aegon the Conqueror, like thousands of years before. And the Hightowers are sort of connected to that. In the main Game of Thrones books, at the current time, the Lord is Lord Leighton Hightower. And he's sort of a mysterious guy who spends all of his time in his tower reading magic books. And someone says, oh, maybe he'll summon a kraken from the deeps. So it sort of raises these questions of like, is Leighton Hightower aware of the Squishers who built the Black Stone? Is he aware of the ancient Dragon Lords? And also, like, in the books, the Hightowers who have been described in their appearance have been blonde. It sounds as though Hightowers are blonde, which might suggest that they might have, like, Valyrian heritage. Maybe they're related to the Dragon Riders who were in Old Town. And there's also, like, the Danes. House Dane has purple eyes and blonde hair. At least some of them do. They almost look like Valyrians in the books, which is interesting because they are not Andals and they are not Valyrians. They are said to be First Men. So, like, if we're trying to figure out who were these Dragon Riders in the South who built the Hightower Foundation, maybe it was ancient Dragon Riders who are the ancestors of the Danes and the ancestors of the Hightowers, potentially, maybe. And, the Danes have this special, unique magic sword forged from a meteor called Dawn, and there are theories that it might be Lightbringer, the sword that defeated the White Walkers and may do it again. We'll get back to topic, but my point is that, yes, the Hightowers are semi-connected to some very mysterious ancient magic and prophecy in the world. And it doesn't seem as though Otto and Hobart are particularly connected to magic, because, sort of the paradox of Old Town and the Hightowers is that at the same time that they are in a place that seems magical, they also are the homeland of the Maesters, who are the secular anti-magic people, to some extent. So it's sort of, and they are the seat of the faith. So, the Hightowers of Old Town, they're sort of balancing the influences of, like, science and religion and magic all at the same time, which is a really interesting, complicated balance. Thanks for the super chat from Ron Sands, who says, do you think there's any symbolism in Viserys killing the stag and Robert's rebellion ending the reign of the Targaryens? Yeah, I mean, in the very beginning of Game of Thrones, we see a direwolf that killed a stag. How can I pull that image up? There was a dead stag, which definitely in the original Game of Thrones show and books was a symbol of a foreshadowing of Robert Baratheon dying and the Baratheons falling, for sure. I mean, in this case, I don't think this particular stag represents Baratheons anymore, because the Baratheons are not super relevant right now. I think that the death of this stag you could interpret as foreshadowing the death of Viserys. I mean, insofar as a stag is a symbol of kingship, especially the white stag, I think the death, that deer is suffering as Viserys is suffering. I mean, it's interesting, like, the deer is this proud, regal, strong, beautiful animal that's all tied up and frustrated and struggling, which seems similar to me to how Viserys is feeling. Viserys is this dragon, he is this regal animal, but he's frustrated and he's tied down and he feels constricted and he doesn't know what to do. So I feel like there's almost a similarity between the stag and Viserys. Thanks for the super chat from Band, who says, it really looked like Crabfeeder has grayscale. Yes, but it might have been the non-contagious version of grayscale, like Shireen had. Thanks for the super chat from Baragos, who says, House Velaryon seems pretty cool and strong. What happened to them 200 years later? Yeah, it's a good question. Like, House Velaryon was so important, but in the time of Game of Thrones, they are not. In the main Game of Thrones show, there are no Velaryon characters. In the books, there are a few. Like, we see the Lord of Driftmark, and he supports Stannis Baratheon. And yeah, they're not really all that powerful anymore. And I think one of the main reasons why the Velaryons are not powerful anymore in Game of Thrones is because they were tied so closely to the Targaryens. So when the Targaryens went down, the Velaryons went down too. It's not like Robert Baratheon would want to be close friends with the people who were close supporters of the Targaryens, you know? But we may learn things in this show about the downfall of the Velaryons. Thanks for the super chat from Jake and from Old Hunter, and from Olivia, who loved Patty Considine, and from Jack, who says, quick thought from the last Q&A, technology advancements. Yeah, so we have talked about how, you know, technology seems to have gone backwards in Westeros. Like, the castles used to be huge and grand, and now they're smaller. But Jack points out that Jaime notices that they've started building round towers, because round towers can deflect catapult stones better than square towers. So yeah, I mean, I don't think Jaime says how recent that was that they figured that out. Thanks for the donation from Smalzish and Jake, who says, it appears the Velaryons and Targaryens have bannermen, lesser families, sworn to them. What happened to these lesser families after the War of the Usurper? Yeah, I mean, there are lords in the Crown Lands, which is the area around King's Landing. And there's people like the Rosbys and the Stokeworths. These are some of these folks. Duskendale, Maidenpool. These are some of the places that are sworn to the Targaryens. And some of them to the Velaryons. I don't know if the Velaryons have any, like, large houses sworn to them. There's also the Celtigars of Sharp Point. Is it Sharp Point where the Celtigars are? It is kind of funny how the Celtigars were left out of this show, because, like, in the previous episode, Corlys Velaryon said that the Velaryons and the Targaryens are the two great Valyrian houses, which is funny because the Celtigars are also a Valyrian house. The Celtigars are also from Valyria, like the Velaryons and the Targaryens. It's just that they're nowhere near as powerful as either of those houses, and they just get ignored. And I guess Corlys does not consider them great. He just considers the Celtigars okay, and that's why they're not one of the great houses. And funnily enough, the Celtigars have a crab as a sigil, as their heraldry. So, you know, new theory. Maybe Kragas Crabfeeder was working for the Celtigars all along. Thanks for the super chat from Antoine, who says that ambiguity around prophecy works best. I agree. Thanks for the super chat from Shane and Bubba Nero, who says, did Jon Snow bond with Rhaegal in Game of Thrones? Or was he already bonded with Daenerys? Yeah, I mean, Jon did fly on Rhaegal in Game of Thrones, didn't he? They did not exactly have a close relationship, but there was a relationship. Yeah, here we are. Here's Jon riding Rhaegal. So, you know, I don't know how much of a bond they developed, but Jon did ride Rhaegal, the green dragon. But yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting to learn more about, like, human-dragon relationships in this show. Like, the Viserys Balerion one, especially, I think is intriguing. He's dead dragon, and I hope that we get to learn more. Thanks for the super chat from Maddie, who said, there was a shot of the king during the hunt that reminded me of that sad clown painting. I don't know what painting you're referring to. Thanks for the super chat from Dustin, who says, don't Targaryens have a thing where they don't get sick? Yeah, the Targaryens believe that they have a thing where they don't get sick, but several Targaryens have died of the plague, and one Targaryen died of grayscale, so they are not completely immune. Not all of them. Thanks for the super chat from Nelly, who says, Caraxes has no free will? Why wasn't he helping? Are you saying why wasn't Caraxes helping during this battle with Daemon? Yeah, I mean, I think that if you wanted to be super logical about it, you would say that Laenor on Seasmoke, and Daemon on Caraxes, and Rhaenys on Melis, and probably Rhaenyra on Syrax all should have been there burning shit. Like, why would you not use all your dragons all the time, you know? But yeah, I mean, I've always felt with all of the battles with dragons, it's like, why would you even bring an army when there's a dragon? Like, I mean, it was like that with, you know, Daenerys' conquest in Game of Thrones Season 7, Game of Thrones Season 8. Why did Daenerys need an army? Why didn't she just roast everyone with her dragons? I mean, yes, dragons can be shot down with scorpion bolts and stuff, but it always seems a bit silly to me, like, so often they start the battle with just the soldiers, and then the tide is turned when the dragon turns up, you know? Like Deus Ex Dragon every time. which feels a bit silly and repetitive. I mean, it's just kind of hard to include dragons in a fantasy story and not make all of the non-dragons irrelevant, which is sort of one of the themes. I mean, George Martin, when he was originally starting to write Game of Thrones in the 90s, he originally considered not including dragons. Game of Thrones was originally not going to have dragons in it, but one of his friends convinced him to include dragons in Game of Thrones, and so George dedicated the first book to her, if I remember rightly. So it almost didn't happen. Thanks for the super chat from Willing to Learn, who says, the Aegon prophecy thing is basically impossible to have been passed down heir to heir, given the bloody Targaryen history, because Maegor usurped the throne and killed the heir of Aenys. Yeah, I agree that it's a bit fucky. Because, yeah, in episode 1 they told us that the Targaryen kings, since Aegon, they have passed down from king to king the secret prophecy of Aegon about the White Walkers. But, like... There have only been 4 Targaryen kings before Viserys, and most of them did not get along with each other. So like maybe Aegon told his son Aenys about the dream. Maybe he also told his other son Maegor. And maybe Aenys told his son Aegon, who died. But thing is, Maegor, the Cruel, rebelled against Aenys, or didn't really rebel against him. He just sort of took the throne after Aenys died, under somewhat suspicious circumstances. And then Maegor sort of had Aenys' children killed. I mean, he killed Aegon and sort of had the others killed in various other ways. And so my point is that, I don't think Aenys told Maegor the prophecy, and I don't think Maegor told anyone any prophecies. It's possible that, like, Aenys told Iria, and maybe Iria told Jaehaerys, because, like, Jaehaerys was much younger than Aenys, so it doesn't seem likely that Aenys would have told Jaehaerys the prophecy. So, like, how did Jaehaerys know? I mean, we presume that Viserys knew from maybe his father Balon, and maybe Balon knew from Jaehaerys, or maybe Jaehaerys told maybe Jaehaerys told Viserys after the council at Harrenhal. My point is that I agree with you that, Targaryen history has been so tumultuous, and the succession has been so unclear for most of the time, that this idea of the kings passing down the message, I think it would have actually been a lot more messy than that. And it would have gotten dangerously close to people failing to pass it on, I think. And my question is still, like, why does it have to be a secret? Why don't they tell all of the great lords, hey, like, there is a big important danger that will come from the north, and we're going to have to be ready. Like, make it a religious thing almost. Make it like a sacred thing. That the Targaryens, make the prophecy known. Like, you don't have to mention the White Walkers because people might not believe in White Walkers, but tell everyone about the prophecy. Thanks for the super chat from Sophie B, who says, the clearly included of the Rhoynar, not only because it was always the traditional styling of the Iron Throne, but also because they kept removing it from the title for no reason in Game of Thrones. Yeah, so the full title is like Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, Protector of the Realm, King of the Andals and the Rhoynar and the First Man. And I think the reason why they didn't include the full title in the Game of Thrones show sometimes was because it's a bit too long. Like, you've got limited screen time. You don't want to spend half a minute every scene doing the full titles. So I'm not mad that they don't do the full titles every time. But yeah, it is curious that they mention the Rhoynar at this point, given that Dorne and the Rhoynar are not part of the realm yet. Thanks for the super chat from Milo, who says, Rhaenyra marrying Aegon would be great. I agree. It could solve some problems. Thanks for the super chat from Jose, who says, thoughts on the armor in this show compared to GOT? I enjoy the armor. I feel like Daemon probably should have worn a helmet when he was going on a suicide mission against all of the arrows that were being fired on him. I mean, the man has a Valyrian steel helmet. It says in the behind the scenes that Daemon's helmet that we saw in episode 1 is made of Valyrian steel. If I was Daemon going on a suicide mission against all these arrows, I think I would wear a helmet. But I guess the logic is that he wanted to appear as though he was surrendering. So not wearing a helmet makes it seem more convincing that he's surrendering. Thanks for the super chat from Vadapili, who says, Tywin would turn in his unborn mother's womb watching this Lannister guy talk to Rhaenyra in the episode. I mean, maybe Tywin wouldn't approve of Jason's, I don't know, silly braggadociousness, but I think he would approve of Jason's ambition. I think if I think Tywin would do a similar thing if he was in Jason's position. Tywin, if there were still dragons in the world at the time of Tywin's life, you better believe Tywin would want one for House Lannister. Thanks for the super chat from Jesus and from Severna, who says, if I was Targ and Song of Ice and Fire was true, I would intermarry with as many families as I could so that the world doesn't end in case of a strong spring sickness. Again, like, Targaryens don't have total immunity to sickness, and, you know, if you intermarried with every family you could, you might give the dragon riding gene to lots of people, and if lots of people could ride dragons, you might end up with a lot of destructive wars, right? Thanks for the super chat from Jesus, who says, probably not a good idea to name the baby Aegon. It's not like the lords would look for any excuse to legitimize Aegon as the rightful heir. Yeah, so naming baby Aegon, Viserys and Alicent's baby, Aegon, calling it Aegon is obviously like a big symbol of like, this kid's going to be the king, because the great founder of the dynasty is Aegon Targaryen the First. So yeah, like Viserys, if Viserys was serious about Rhaenyra being heir, he should not have named his son Aegon. I mean, maybe it was probably Otto's idea to name the kid Aegon, if we're being honest. I don't think Viserys should have accepted it, but that's Viserys' problem. He just lets people do what they want too much, and it muddies the succession. Thanks for the super chat from Ruludos and Ruben and Nelly, who says, yep, that Jason is Sir Hugh. Thanks for the super chat from Dylan and Zerg. Thanks for the super chat from Morgan, who says, I'm enjoying the show. My biggest issue is the time jumping and fast travel. Yeah, well, the time jumping sort of has to happen because this is like a historical show that takes place over many years, but the time jumping will slow down. They will presumably, they're going to jump several times in this season, but I think after this season, the time jumping is going to mostly go away. Because, like, what we're experiencing now is mostly, like, the backstory, and then we're going to get to, like, the meat, where most of the stuff happens in quick succession. That's going to start happening around the end of the season, is, I think, the idea. And fast travel, I mean, mostly we've just been in King's Landing and Dragonstone, which are very close. And Stepstones, like, it took them a long time, like, it was years. So, yeah, I don't think there's fast traveling happening. Thanks for the super chat from Jake, who commends Ramin Djawadi for his soundtrack. Thanks for the super chat from Daniel and Reckless, who says, why didn't Rhaenyra kill the White Hart? I think it shows her ability to show mercy and peace. But I agree, like, if she brought it back, it would have been a symbol of her legitimacy. Thanks for the super chat from Fernando, who says, was it just me, or did it seem like sea smoke seemed to change colors? Yeah, I agree. I think that sea smoke might be sort of like dark gray on like the top of the dragon and then lighter gray on like the underside of the dragon. See how like it's almost white on the underside and the wings are almost like red? Yeah, I hope we get a better look at sea smoke later on. Thanks for the super chat from Julius, who says, do you think that certain Greyjoys might make an appearance? I certainly hope so. Yeah, like people have been asking, like, are we going to see Starks? Are we going to see Lannisters? Are we going to see Greyjoys? And the answer is yes, yes, yes. The show is mostly about Targaryens, but we absolutely will see some other familiar houses for sure. Thanks for the super chat from Dan, who says, was Strong's recommendation to look closer to home a reference to Jaime's song about Cersei in the Coldplay Game of Thrones musical? I have not seen the Coldplay Game of Thrones musical, so I don't know. Thanks Daniel and AU, who says, thanks for the entertainment. Thank you Austin, who says, this ep made me painfully aware I was watching TV, everything was so bad. I'm sorry you had a bad time, Austin. Thanks for the donation from Sebastian, who says, how many seasons will the show last for? The co-creators said that it would be 3 or 4 seasons to cover this story, but they might cover other historical periods later on. Thanks for the super chat from Aho, who says, will Noodleneck run in 2024? I would vote for Caraxes, personally. Thanks Daniel, who says, is there a connection between the stags who were hunted and the Baratheons who took the Targaryen throne? I don't think the stags really represent the Baratheons right now, because there are no Baratheons in this episode. But I think that the stags and the deers more represent kings in general. Like, that's what they said, you know, the white stag is royalty. So it is very interesting that Viserys sort of awkwardly butchered his brown deer, whereas Rhaenyra seemed to have a special peaceful moment with her symbolic shiny Pokemon, white deer. Thanks to Brian, who says, hot take, Rhaenyra doesn't have a claim. Either the precedence of the Harrenhal Council stands and they crown Aegon, or if they go against it and the claim belongs to Rhaenys. Yeah, I mean, you can make that argument. Like, you can make the argument that, if Rhaenys can inherit the throne, then Rhaenys should inherit the throne ahead of her. But, I mean, there's different ways of looking at it. Because, like, you can see the Harrenhal Council as setting a rule that there must always be a male ruler and never a female ruler. But you can also see the council as being more limited and simply meaning that Viserys was the most appropriate ruler at the time. Some people push the narrative that it set a male precedent, but some people don't. But yeah, I mean, you can certainly... Rhaenys would feel very salty right now, and we saw a bit of that last episode, when Rhaenys was, like, visibly frustrated that, they're talking about, will Viserys' son be the heir, or will Rhaenyra be the heir? But no one is talking about Rhaenys being the heir, which sucks, because she seems like a pretty capable person, and she's got a pretty cool red dragon. Thanks for the super chat from Basically a God, who says, what do you think about Otto suggesting that Rhaenyra marry young Aegon? Well, I think that the rivalry and the uncertainty between will Rhaenyra rule or will Aegon rule, you could fix that by marrying Aegon to Rhaenyra. That would fix that problem. However, you would then have the problem of Laenor with a dragon, and Rhaenys with a dragon, and Corlys with a giant fleet, and Laena with sass, would be upset. You would have this very powerful dragon-riding family who would be upset about not being included again. Like, Corlys feels so insulted by the times Rhaenys was rejected, Laena was rejected. If Rhaenyra rejects Laenor by marrying Aegon, I think Corlys would be very pissed, but we'll have to see what happens. Thanks for the super chat from Wealth Wolf, who says, I loved the scene where Rhaenyra complained to Sir Crispy Cole. I hope they show how much common people suffer from this internal family struggle. Yeah, I mean, Jorah says that when the High Lords play their Game of Thrones, it's the common people who suffer. And the common people don't care who's on the throne. They don't care about issues of political legitimacy. They just care about their crops and their harvest and their personal safety. So I agree. Like, I want to see the common person's perspective. And I think that we probably will see that as the story goes on. We at least got a little bit from that long-suffering minstrel, which was quite funny. Samwell, the human iPod. Thanks for the super chat from Toolsy, who says, Rhaenyra walking back into camp reminded me of Legends of the Fall. Jake says, if you were a minor lord in this world, which team would you be on? Well, the teams are still forming, so we'll discuss that when it happens in the show. Thanks for the donation from Clyden, who says, do you think the show might delve into some of the high fantasy stuff, like Valyrian blood magic? I think they might. There was some interesting commentary from George R.R. Martin in a video released by HBO recently, where he was talking about, like, his philosophy of magic in A Song of Ice and Fire. Let me see if I can pull that up real quick. Because there was a cool video where George R. Martin was basically saying that, yeah, here we are. Here's a quote from George R. Martin. So, sometimes, in some fantasy stories, there are magic systems where there's a certain recipe and certain words. You say Expelliarmus and then the thing happened. But George Martin thinks that's boring. When it's too structured and predictable, magic is boring. So George likes it being a bit more complicated than that. Quote, in magic, it's not just the recipe or the words of the spell, it's who you are, who's doing it, and what are you feeling when you're doing it. The Valyrians, while practicing their blood magic and their fire magic, noticed that it didn't matter whether you pronounced the words of the spell right, whether you made the correct sacrifice to the correct god. All of that may have some importance, but one of the big things was who you are and what was your relation to the dragons. That's something that George Martin said about magic recently in a House of the Dragon promo video. So I think that we can expect more magic stuff. I mean, they've already revealed stuff about Enogrion and the volcanoes were the source of the power. And so, yeah, I think they are delving into that, which is curious. Like, what role will magic play in this story? It's a good question. And it sort of fits Fire and Blood because Fire and Blood was written by maesters who don't trust magic, and so maybe the maesters who wrote the history book chose not to include the magic. So I think there is room for magic to be in this show that wasn't in the book. And I think it's really interesting how he's emphasizing the connection between magic and dragons, because, you know, in the time of the main Game of Thrones show, there are no dragons at first in season 1, and there's like no magic. And the books talk about how that now that Daenerys' dragons have been born, magic seems to be returning to the world. Magic is stronger now. The glass candles are burning, and the fire mages can do fire magic. There's like this rising tide of the world is becoming more magical because of the birth of dragons. And now, in the time of House of the Dragon, there are dragons, and there are going to be more and more dragons pretty soon. And so you would think that the more dragons there are, the more magic there should be. This should be a magical time in Westeros. So it's going to be really interesting how much of that we get to see in the show. Thanks for the super chat from Takumi and Samuel and Non, who says, eggs could only get so big without breaking. Much like sauropod eggs, they only get to 1/2 foot long, and they were the largest animals on land. Yeah, I imagine that once the egg gets really, really big, it's also very difficult to lay the egg without giving yourself great discomfort. Thanks for the donation from Tronsky, loving these breakdowns. Thanks for the super chat from Sean, who says, if Emma had Targaryen blood, did she ever have a dragon? That's a good question. Yeah, because Emma Arryn, the mother of Rhaenyra and the dead wife of King Viserys, her mother was Daella Targaryen, who was the daughter of King Jaehaerys Targaryen. So theoretically, maybe Emma could have ridden a dragon. I mean, it's interesting that, you know, Jaehaerys and Alysanne, they had 9 children who lived to adulthood, but only 3 of them had dragons: Aemon, Balon, and Alyssa. I think it was those 3. So not every Targaryen has a dragon. Like, lots of Targaryens, especially the women, don't ride dragons. So it's like, did they try to bond with a dragon and fail, or did they just choose not to ride a dragon? Like, what was the deal? We don't know. And it'll be interesting to see that in this show, like who will and who won't bond with dragons. Thanks for the super chat from All Right, who says, why don't they just marry the dragons? If you love them so much, marry them. Thank you, Sean, who says, love this channel. How do you bring up these images so fast? Practice and magic. Thanks for the super chat from David, who says, can all dragon riders walk in fire? In the Game of Thrones TV show, Daenerys seems to be fireproof all the time. In the books, Daenerys is not fireproof. She gets burned at one point. And so in the books, Targaryens are not immune to fire, but in the TV show, it seems like some Targaryens are immune to fire. The show is not super clear. Like, Daenerys is, but will Targaryens in House of the Dragon be immune to fire? Maybe. I suspect not, because House of the Dragon is trying to be close to the books, and the books don't have fireproof Targaryens. Thanks for the super chat from Zero, who says, how do you remember Night King 1? Thanks for the super chat from African Sci-Fi Scholar, who says, it seems like Caraxes felt Daemon get hit by an arrow. Psychic connection. Yeah, we mentioned that when Daemon got hit by an arrow, Caraxes seemed to sort of scream in pain. And yeah, I think that's similar to the Stark warg connection with their wolves. I think that's really cool. And, you know, also it almost seemed like Daemon might have been using some kind of psychic connection to control Caraxes better, like raising Caraxes' wing. Like, I don't think it's all just like the saddle or whatever. Like, can the dragon even feel like if there are reins being pulled or anything? I think there may be a lot of magic involved in dragon control, and I hope we learn more. And Scholar also says that Bran the Builder helped build the High Tower. I mean, there's a lot of mythology about Brandon the Builder. Like, depending on who you ask, Brandon built the Wall and Storm's End and the High Tower and a bunch of other places. It's not realistic that one person could have done so much. So it's all ambiguous. It's all uncertain, long-lost history. Thanks for the donation from Queensland, Australia, who says, sorry if asked before, Daemon had blood from the crab feeder. Yeah, I think that the crab feeder's grayscale is non-contagious like Shireen's. Thanks to the super chat from Zachary, who says, I need a cock in my life. I agree, A Clash of Kings is a good book. Thank you, Zuve. I agree. Daemon has some plot armor when he's running through those arrows. It seems a bit ridiculous to me. Thank you, Blackfire, who says, do you think the crown Viserys saw on his baby's head were the knives that cut open Emma? Oh my god, Blackfire. Yeah, you might be right. Viserys said that he had a dream that he would have a son. And he said that he dreamed that that son would be born with a crown on his head. And Emma sort of laughed and, said that would be uncomfortable. And maybe you're right. Like, maybe the metal crown that Viserys saw in his dream was actually the metal scalpel that Melos used to cut open Emma. And maybe Viserys, through the fog of dream, just interpreted that as he wanted to interpret it, as a crown. I think that's a cool idea. And also, all of Viserys' other details in his dream about, like, thundering hooves and smashing shields and dragons roaring as one. I think we all should look out for other examples of those things as the story goes on, because there may be many different ways to interpret that prophecy. Thanks, Westeros and Chill. Thanks, Zhao, who says, it's kind of silly, but I wish the dragons followed the patterns of animals having counter shading, lighter colors under and darker above. Why do animals have lighter colors under and darker colors above? Yeah, I guess that is a thing. I wonder why. Thanks for the super chat from Beats by Melisandre, who says, I thought the first episode was flying through plot, but now we've had 3 episodes that are nearly redundant. Yeah, it slows down. I mean, I think, this is like a slow boil, rising tension. It's about establishing the relationships. If you want more action and violence and stuff happening, there will certainly be a lot of that soon. The pace will pick up. Things will get... look, I mean, the book is called Fire and Blood, and there's going to be a lot of both, but at the moment it's really about setting the relationships and the tension. Thanks for the super chat from DM and Sane, who points out the pug. How did Westeros crossbreed dogs enough to reach the genetic abomination that is a pug? Yeah, I mean, I guess it takes some serious, like, long-term animal husbandry to create something as messed up as a pug. But I mean, they have bloody Caraxes, he's like the dragon equivalent of a pug. The person who designed him described him as having a deviated septum and being sort of physically strange. And I mean, the Targaryens themselves are a bit sort of, I mean, Matt Smith's Habsburg chin looks like he might be the product of generations of incest. No offense, Matt Smith. So yeah, look, yeah, what is the dog culture? What kind of dog breeds they got in Westeros? I don't know. Thanks for the super chat from Andrew and Nick and Deeb, who says, how do you feel about the pacing? Yeah, I think it'll speed up. Thank you, Arnie and Himbo. How good of a dad is Viserys? I think Viserys' heart is in the right place, but I think he's making some shaky decisions. And thanks for the super chat from Wiley, who says, you should check out a video called George Martin on his favorite Targaryen. All right, we're going to wrap up the stream. Thank you so much for all participating. Before we wrap it up, we will just have a quick look-see through the preview of the next episode. But everybody, thank you so much for participating. Did you know that you can get a free audiobook with an Audible trial? It's true. If you want the full story of Fire and Blood and the World of Ice and Fire and the whole House of the Dragon story, you can listen to it on audiobook if you go to audible.com/ASX. Did you know? It's true. You can. Audible.com/ASX. And if you cancel the trial, you still get to keep the free book. Did you know? It's true. Thank you all for participating. Please subscribe and like and comment. And let's have a look at the preview of the next episode. So guys, if you are not wanting to see the preview of the next episode, we're going to watch that now. So, potential small spoilers for episode 4. We're going to do it. We're going to do it. All right, let's do it. So that's the inside the episode. Where's the preview of the next episode? All right, here we are. Let's look at the preview. All right, so this actually is quite interesting. So we see Rhaenyra Targaryen with the Catspore dagger, Valyrian steel dagger that kills the White Walkers. We see some like Valyrian glyphs on the knife, which is pretty cool, that only seem to be visible when you put it in fire, which is exactly like the One Ring in The Lord of the Rings, which is quite funny. And so she says, "From my blood come the prince that was promised." And the prince that was promised, aka Azor Ahai, aka Yintar, aka Lil Peep, is the prophesied figure who is expected to defeat the White Walkers. And some people think Daenerys is the prince that was promised, or Jon Snow. Maybe it's Arya in Game of Thrones Season 8. I don't know. But it is very interesting that they are really explicitly exploring this prophecy stuff. There is a very old Shift X video about Azor Ahai, about this prophecy stuff. I think that video was a bit bad compared to the new ones, but if you're interested in Azor Ahai, you could go watch that. But yeah, very interesting to see Rhaenyra engaging more with the prophecy. What are we going to learn? What's going to be revealed? I almost hope that they don't reveal too much. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be so interesting, all these questions about, like, you know, since Arya killed the White Walkers, is Arya the prince that was promised? It's so weird. It's a weird mishmash of like show and book canon. Yeah, and his song will be the Song of Ice and Fire, is part of this prophecy apparently, and that's why Jon Snow makes sense as the prince that was promised, because he is Stark Ice and Targaryen Fire, Rhaegar and Lyanna. So, you know, is this Rhaenyra foreshadowing Jon Snow being the hero? Maybe. We see Otto by the Iron Throne. We see Daemon with a haircut, so I guess this is years later. We got Alicent in a nice yellow nightgown, Balerion's skull, the crown, lots of talk about succession. Is there some kind of announcement that's going to happen here? That's very interesting. Yeah, it looks like some kind of announcement. And then we've got some dialogue from a street performer who says, like, who's going to be the heir? Will it be Daemon Targaryen? Will it be baby Aegon? Will it be the daughter Rhaenyra? So it looks like the uncertain succession continues to be an issue in this episode. I really like this outfit that Rhaenyra is wearing. And you'll notice that Rhaenyra is now wearing her Valyrian steel necklace again. That's the necklace that Daemon gave to Rhaenyra, and she took it off when she went to confront Daemon at Dragonstone, and they were rivals, but now she's wearing it again, so maybe Rhaenyra will be closer to Daemon again. Thanks for the super chat from Zachary, who says, can we expect a cock abridged? There is a podcast called Game of Thrones Abridged by AltShiftX. I don't recommend it because that person is just an absolute rapscallion, and you know, it goes on silly tangents all the time. But if you want to, you can check out AltShiftX. Thanks for the super chat from Ethan and Wealth Wolf, the pug that was promised. Maybe the pug is the prince that was promised. Thanks for the super chat from Sean, who says, did you like the episode? Yeah, I did like this episode. I had fun. This episode felt almost comedic to me in a lot of ways. Like, I don't know, like you know, Rhaenyra and Jason was comedic, and like the human iPod shuffle, the minstrel Sam was a very comedic moment. And like Viserys, like there was some very real drama with Viserys and his emotional pain, but it also was comical the way Viserys was so sick of all the politics. So I found this to be quite a funny episode, personally. And the ridiculous bombast of Daemon's attack and Crab Feeder. So I found it entertaining. I found this to be a bit lighter and simpler than the previous episodes. And yet we have been talking continuously about it for 3.5 hours, which is why we're going to wrap up this live stream very, very shortly. So in the preview of the next episode, we see Daemon Targaryen, the rogue prince, wearing the crown of the Stepstones. They named me the King of the Narrow Sea, he says. So in classic Daemon fashion, he has decided to crown himself as the king of these like shitty, irrelevant islands, which is, you know, just funny, and it's shit-stirring, and it is a challenge to Viserys, you know? Daemon is calling himself a king, you know, as like a rival in his own power. And I think Daemon might be holding Kragas Crabfeeder's hammer there, actually. I think that hammer is the hammer that Crabfeeder used to nail people to the beach, I think. So that's pretty cool. So yeah, Daemon is just like dripping with trophies and swag and just being cool. It sort of reminds me of in the Blackfire Rebellions, there was King Daeron Targaryen versus Daemon Blackfire. And Daemon Blackfire was like the rebel. He wasn't really the rightful king, but he was very cool, and he was a warrior, and he had Blackfire, and he was a cool dude. I think that the Daemon rivalry is very similar to Viserys and Daemon. So yeah, it looks like the succession continues to be complicated, and it looks like there's a courtship happening with Rhaenyra deciding who she wants to marry. Because yeah, in this episode, Viserys said, "Hey Rhaenyra, like you can choose. Like let me help me out here. Tell me who you want to marry, and you can marry him." So it looks as though there might be a situation where Rhaenyra gets to meet some eligible bachelors. You ever see those like viral clickbait YouTube videos of Tinder in real life, where people just like see people like speed date and just swipe left and right on them in real life? Maybe Rhaenyra is doing Tinder in real life in this next episode. That'll be fun. I wonder who she will choose. So there continues to be tension between Rhaenyra and Viserys. A nice shot of, is that King's Landing? Or is that somewhere else? Is that like Lannisport or something? That's an interesting sort of coastal scene, landscape that we haven't seen before. The Princeling is now 3, so it looks like next episode is 1 year after this episode. And we hear about a vile accusation, discomforting news. It looks as though Otto might be spreading nasty rumors about Rhaenyra in the same way that he spread nasty rumors about Daemon's heir for a day speech. And yeah, Rhaenyra talks about vile accusations. So what accusation has been made? Is it an accusation against Rhaenyra? What are these hands here doing? Is someone having hanky-panky with somebody? Is someone accusing someone of hanky-panky? We have some like jesters with some big hats for some goddamn reason. Maybe those are the street performers. If I had to guess, I would say that the street performer in the voiceover who's saying, who's going to be the king, Rhaenyra or Daemon or the baby, maybe that street performer had these like clown minstrel people. Maybe that was part of the performance, and maybe the Targaryens are angry about that performance because it undermined Rhaenyra and like questioned the succession, and so maybe the Targaryens are punishing these street performers for their performance. A little bit like Marillion and Joffrey in Game of Thrones. Who is responsible for this gossip? I will take out their eyes. So someone's made an accusation about hanky-panky. Not in Rhaenyra's nature to be deceitful. I cannot say the same about your brother. What deceit is Daemon up to? He's in a black hood, so he must be up to no good. There's a bit of fire magic going on. So yeah, you know how I was saying how like in the books, when Daenerys' dragons are born, fire magic becomes more powerful. In book 2, Quaithe talks about it. So yeah, maybe this here is an example of fire magic that is more powerful because of dragons. Or maybe he's just using special like flammable powders and stuff, which is also something that happens in the books. Here's a Rhaenyra running around in a beanie. Not sure what that's about. Someone's drinking. Looks like Rhaenyra's having a bit of teenage rebellion by the looks of it. Daemon in a hood, up to no good. Kristen and Rhaenyra on a ship when Caraxes flies overhead. Maybe, that's Daemon returning to King's Landing after his war. And yeah, you'll see it all here on the Alt Shift X live stream in 7 days. We are doing a live stream like this every week at Sunday Eastern Time, approximately 9:15 p.m. or something. What time is it? We've got to end this stream. Thank you so much for participating, everybody. Really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for your super chats. I apologize if I missed some of them. Thanks for the super chat from Amongst Us Law. And if you would like a free audiobook, you can get it at audible.com/ASX. Like you can literally just like get a free audiobook and then cancel the trial, and you get to keep the audiobook. You can get Dune for the second Dune movie coming out. Crabs in the chat. Pour one out for our boy Kragas Crab Feeder. Go and watch Glidus's new YouTube video, the YouTube channel Glidus. Watch his Bliss Takes. Yeah, look, have fun. Be cool. Eat your veggies. Say hi to your mum. And we'll end it now. Like and subscribe. And you might like to subscribe to the Alt Shift X podcast. There is an Alt Shift X podcast. There's actually 2 Alt Shift X podcasts. There's also a audio podcast. And the audio podcast is the audio from each Alt Shift X video. So all of the explained videos, like the theory videos and stuff. We haven't put all of the videos up yet, but all the recent Alt Shift X videos, if you would like to listen to them as audio, you can subscribe to the podcast with your favorite podcast app or on Spotify. It also means you might get notified better. YouTube doesn't send notifications sometimes, so if you set notifications to the Alt Shift X audio podcast on your podcast app, you may get notified. And you can also check out the podcast for interviews and chats and things. There's links in the chat to the podcasts, to the merch. Thanks so much for participating, and we will have the House of the Dragon Season 1 Episode 3 Explained video out on Friday, hopefully. Cheers. Thanks, guys.